supreme shock. A leaked draft shows the Supreme Court poised to overturn Roe v. Wade.
If this decision holds, it's really quite a radical decision.
After decades of abortion being protected, is it about to become illegal in much of the U.S.? I'll speak to the Republican governor of Mississippi, Tate Reeves, next. And Battle Cry. The leak ignites outrage and protests across the nation as Democrats vow to fight for abortion rights.
This is a life or death moment, and we need to fight like it is.
But will the court's decision affect how Americans vote this November? Democratic Senator Kirsten Gillibrand joins me to discuss ahead. Plus, proxy war? Russia is set to celebrate Victory Day, with signs Putin could escalate his war strategy, as reports suggest the U.S. is going further to help Ukraine. I'll speak to the U.S. Ambassador to the United Nations, Linda Thomas Greenfield, in moments. Good morning. I'm Jake Tapper in Washington, where the State of our Union is on the brink of a very different America. The nation is still reacting to this unprecedented leak from the U.S. Supreme Court revealing a draft majority opinion on a Mississippi abortion case that would overrule the landmark 1973 ruling Roe v. Wade. The majority draft was written by Justice Samuel Alito and supported by 4 other justices, according to Politico, which obtained the draft and broke the story. While not final, the stakes of this decision have already spurred protests and celebrations across the country and a new debate in Washington between those who want to nationalize the right to an abortion and those who want to ban it everywhere. New CNN polling shows a vast majority of the public, 2/3, do not support overturning Roe v. Wade, but so much remains unclear what the final decision will actually be, what will happen in each state if the constitutional right to abortion is removed, if the Supreme Court overturns Roe. Right now, there are 19 states that had abortion bans on the books before Roe was decided, or have passed so-called trigger laws that will ban abortion and snap into place if Roe is overturned. So let's begin with the governor of the state at the center of this Supreme Court case, Republican Tate Reeves of Mississippi. Governor Reeves, thanks for joining us this morning. So Mississippi is one of the states that has a trigger law passed in 2007 that will ban all abortions except in cases of rape or in cases where the mother's life is at stake, with no exceptions for incest, if Roe is overturned. This would require the state attorney general to certify that Roe v. Wade is no longer in effect. So if the court rules as expected, is Mississippi going to implement that trigger law and make all abortion, except in those 2 narrow circumstances, illegal?
Well, thank you for having me on this morning, Jake, and happy Mother's Day to all the moms and grandmoms out there, including the First Lady of Mississippi, Ely. Yes, Mississippi does have a trigger law in place that was passed in 2007, and that trigger law will go into effect should the draft opinion, which obviously has been a bit of a bombshell this entire week from a national conversation and political discussion. But yes, our trigger law will go into effect. It does have an exception for rape. It does have an exception for the life of the mother.
As this country saw before 1973, banning abortion does not actually end abortion. It causes girls and women to seek out methods that are not as safe to end their pregnancies, methods that in the past resulted in mutilation or even death. Now, Mississippi, according to your State Department of Health, has about 3,500 abortions a year. Has the state done any analysis of what the state thinks will happen to those women and girls if this law goes into effect? How many unwanted pregnancies will result in deliveries? How many will result in women and girls dying because they seek out unsafe methods? Have you done an analysis that way?
Well, that's a great question, Jake, and I really do appreciate it. And what I would say to you is this: not only have we done an analysis, we've started doing the hard work of what a post-Roe Mississippi will look like. In fact, we believe that if in fact this leaked opinion is accurate, and if in fact a majority of the justices of the Supreme Court are going to overturn Roe, we must understand that while this is a great victory for the pro-life movement, it is not the end. In fact, it is just the beginning. And the beginning is that we must show that being pro-life is not just about being anti-abortion. And so in our state, that the work that is being done goes in 2 directions. Number one, we have to do everything we can to make it easier on those moms who may be in unwanted pregnancies. And that's the reason that we, this year, just in the last couple of weeks, I've signed legislation to provide help and resources and money to the 37 pregnancy resource centers that are located in every region of our state. We want to make sure that we get those individuals, ladies and women and expected mothers, the help that they need from a healthcare standpoint. But it's not just about the healthcare. It's about other resources that are available to those moms. And the second piece of being prepared and the next phase of the pro-life movement is about what are we doing to help those babies that maybe are, they do go to full term, that the moms do have. And what we're trying to do is focus on making adoption easier in Mississippi. We're focusing on improving our foster care system. We've had challenges in the past, and we recognize that, and we admit that, but we're investing in that system over $100 million to improve technology at the Department of Human Services and at our Child Protection Service.
So Governor, you just said that you did do an analysis. Can you tell us anything more about the analysis? What did the state of Mississippi conclude as to, of the 3,500 abortions that happen on average per year in Mississippi, how many of those girls and women will seek unsafe abortions? How many might die? How many might end up hurt, mutilated, whatever? What did the analysis reveal?
Well, Jake, I can't predict for you exactly what's going to happen in the future. What I can tell you is what we're trying to do in Mississippi is we're trying to provide those potential expectant mothers the resources that they need so that they can go to a full term of pregnancy. If they choose to keep that child, then that's a great outcome. We want to make sure that we provide them the resources that they need, provide them the help that they need. But if they choose not to, we want to make sure that we have plans in place to protect those babies once they're born, and that's why we talk about foster care. We talk about adoptions and other things, creating forever homes for those babies.
So, Governor, you and I have talked about this before, but Mississippi, as you know, has the highest rate of infant mortality in the United States. You have the highest rate of child poverty in the United States. Your state has no guaranteed maternity leave that's paid. The legislature in Mississippi just rejected extending postpartum Medicaid coverage. Your foster care system is also the subject of a long-running federal lawsuit over its failure to protect children from abuse. You and I have had this conversation before. I hear you. You say you want to do more to support mothers and children, but you've been in state government since 2004. You were the state treasurer, then you were the lieutenant governor, now you're the governor. Based on the track record of the state of Mississippi, why should any of these girls or moms believe you?
Well, look, as I've told you before, and I'll tell you again, the reality is that when I got elected governor, my very first speech in my inaugural address, I was very clear that I believe in my heart that I was elected not to try to hide our problems, but to try to fix our problems. We have a long history of poor health outcomes. It's due in large part to poverty, and so we are focusing every day on fixing the challenges that are before us. When you talk about things, when you talk about these young ladies, the best thing we can do for them is to provide and improve educational opportunities for them. And we've worked extremely hard in our state to do that. We've got to continue to work to provide workforce opportunities, jobs for these individuals. But to do that, they've got to improve the quality of their skills, and we as a state are investing heavily in that. But yes, you're right. We've got a number of years of poor outcomes, but we're working every single day to improve that, and I think you'll see us make significant progress, just as we have seen significant progress on the educational outcome front in Mississippi over the last 10 years.
So the snapback law that was passed in 2007 has no exception for incest. So assuming that the Supreme Court overturns Roe v. Wade, the state of Mississippi will force girls and women who are the victims of incest to carry those childs to term. Can you explain why that is going to be your law?
Well, that's going to be the law because in 2007, the Mississippi legislature passed it. I will tell you, Jake, and this sort of speaks to how far the Democrats in Washington have come on this issue. But in 2007, when the trigger law was put in place, we had a Democrat Speaker of the House and we had a Democrat chairman of the Public Health Committee in the Mississippi House of Representatives
but
that
why are you
this particular piece of legislation.
Why is it acceptable in your state to force girls who are victims of incest to carry those children to term?
Well, as you know, Jake, over 92% of all abortions in America are elective procedures. When you look at the number of those that actually are involved in incest, it's less than 1%. And if we need to have that conversation in the future about potential exceptions in the trigger law, we can certainly do that. But the reality is that, again, that affects less than 1% of all abortions in America on an annual basis.
Okay, but that is going to be the law of Mississippi. Let me ask you, what about a fetus that has serious or fatal abnormalities that will not allow that fetus to live outside the womb? Is the state of Mississippi going to force those girls and women who have this tragedy inside them to carry the child to term? Are you going to force them to do that?
Well, Jake, I'll tell you, I think that these questions illustrate exactly what we've been talking about, and that is you're dealing in examples that are rare and are a very small percentage of the overall abortions. And the reason for that is because when you talk to Americans, regardless of what the polling says with respect to overturning Roe v. Wade, the vast majority of Americans recognize that the abortion laws in America right now, that is what are extreme. America's abortion laws are extreme relative to the rest of the Western world.
Yeah.
You know that even if the court did not overturn Roe, Jake, even if the court did not overturn Roe, even if they just decided to uphold Mississippi's 15-week ban, that 39 out of 42 countries in Europe would still have more restrictive abortion laws.
Yeah.
The vast majority of Americans support restrictions that are reasonable on abortions, and the overturning of Roe is simply going to return those decision-making processes
to the states,
back to the individual legislatures in all 50 states.
And I'm asking you about the law in your state and the exceptions that the law does not offer to Mississippi women and girls who are victims of incest, who have fetuses that have fatal or very serious abnormalities, which is not really all that rare, to be honest. I mean, I know plenty of women that has happened to, and they had to they wanted to have a healthy child, but they weren't able to, and your law would force them to carry the child to term. I want to ask you a philosophical question here, because I know you have said you believe that life begins at conception. Just to be clear, does that mean the moment of fertilization or the moment of implantation?
I believe that life begins at conception. And as I've said repeatedly, and I know where this question is ultimately going with respect to the birth control and other measures, I want to be clear. My view is that the next phase of the pro-life movement is focusing on helping those moms that maybe have an unexpected and unwanted pregnancy. The next phase of the pro-life movement is making sure that those babies, once born, have a productive life. And while I'm sure there'll be conversations around America regarding that, it's not something that we've spent a lot of time focused on.
Does that mean that you believe that you believe the conception is the moment of implantation? Is that what you're saying?
That is not what I'm saying. What I'm saying is, again, this is a debate that we can have once the actual court makes their ruling, once the actual words are on the page. That's what makes this whole topic so difficult, and quite frankly, what makes the leak so wrong is that we don't have an opinion. We don't know what the court is actually going to say, and I would hope that the Chief Justice and others at the court would actually get this opinion out sooner rather than later, so that those of us who deal with the laws and those of us who have to deal with the actual words on the page know exactly what they say and know what they allow and what they don't. There is no fundamental right to an abortion in the U.S. Constitution. There is nothing in the U.S. Constitution that precludes individual states from regulating or restricting abortions, and that's the ruling that the court should make. But again, all we have is a leaked draft. We don't have a final.
I agree.
I agree say on the matter.
But just to be clear, the state of Mississippi, you're not going to then target IUD or Plan B, which are methods of birth control that might not allow a fertilized egg to be implanted. And this is not a theoretical construct. This is not the state of Louisiana, which I recognize is a neighboring state, not your state. I mean, they're talking about not only criminally charging girls and women who get abortions as being committing homicide, but they're also talking about defining the moment of conception as fertilization, which would theoretically, if this were to become the law of Louisiana, and it is not yet, mean that murder, if you use an IUD, you are committing murder theoretically. So it's not, I'm not making this up. These are the conversations going on in legislatures in your area. But so just to be clear, you have no intention of seeking to ban IUDs or Plan B?
That is not what we're focused on at this time. We're focused on looking at see what the court allows for. The bill that is before the court is a 15-week ban. We believe that the overturning of Roe is the correct decision by the court, and so in Mississippi we don't have laws on the books that would lead to arresting individuals or anything along those lines.
You mean not arresting girls or women, but you would arrest doctors?
Well, certainly, I don't think that that you're going to see doctors performing abortions if we have a state statute which says that they are not allowable, except for those exceptions that we've mentioned earlier.
So one of the other topics that people talk about, legal experts discuss, is that the reasoning that Justice Alito uses in this draft opinion, as you point out, it's not an official opinion, it's just a draft opinion, but one of the legal reasoning he uses is that he says, as you say, abortion is not a right specifically enumerated in the Constitution. Legal experts point out that could just as easily be applied to other landmark court decisions, for instance, same-sex marriage. Alito even references the Obergefell ruling that affirmed that right in his draft opinion. Would you want the U.S. Supreme Court to overturn that precedent as well, that granted same-sex couples the right to get married in the United States?
Well, there are two differentiating factors with respect to the other cases that I think is important to point out. Number one, the fact is when you're dealing with abortion, unlike the other cases that you talk about, abortion involves not only the mother and that particular life, but it also involves the life of an unborn American child that doesn't have the ability to speak for themselves. And that's why it's important folks like me take this opportunity to stand up and speak on their behalf. So that's a very important differentiating factor. But the second important factor is, unlike those other areas, in my view, the abortion rights that Roe v. Wade chose to enact in our country wrongly, those particular rights were never agreed upon and never really politically determined, other than there's a 50-50 split at best on abortion rights. In the other instances, by and large, public opinion has come to support the decisions that were made by the court. And I think that Justice Alito, in his alleged draft opinion that is agreed to by 5 judges, addressed that, and I believe in that particular case, he said that there is a differentiating factor, and it is the fact that there is a right of an unborn child when it comes to abortion.
In point of fact, Governor, yes, it is true that the American people support legal abortion with restrictions, but it is also true that 2/3 of the American people consistently support keeping Roe v. Wade in place. In any case, we thank you so much for your time today, Governor Reeves. And you just heard from Governor Reeves. We have Democratic Senator Kirsten Gillibrand from New York here to respond to him and the question of what lawmakers can do if Roe is overturned. That's next. Plus, just how far is the U.S. willing to go to help Ukraine defeat Russia? Is that changing? We'll talk to the UN ambassador ahead. Stay with us.
like to speak to America's men for 1 minute. Imagine you do not have authority over your own body for 10 months. It is barbaric, it is inhumane, it is unacceptable, and I hope every human being in this country understands that when you take away a woman's right to make her decisions about her health and well-being, she is no longer a full citizen.
Welcome back to State of the Union. I'm Jake Tapper. That was Democratic Senator Kirsten Gillibrand of New York reacting to that leaked draft of the Supreme Court opinion on abortion. Democrats have been warning about this possibility for decades, frankly. The question is there anything lawmakers can do to stop it? Senator Gillibrand is joining us now. First of all, Senator, happy Mother's Day. Good to see you today. We appreciate you taking the time. You just heard Governor Tate Reeves say that if this ruling stands, Mississippi is going to ban almost all abortions in the state, with exceptions for rape, only if somebody is prosecuted or charges are brought, and also if there's the life of the mother is at stake. No exception for incest. What was your reaction to Governor Reeves?
Well, I thought he was quite paternalistic towards women. He indicated during your conversation that all we need is more education for women. I was pretty offended by his remarks, and he doesn't look at women as full citizens. He's taken away their right to make these fundamental decisions about when they're having children, under what circumstances they're having children, how many children they're having, at what point in their life they're having children. It's outrageous that this governor and governors and legislatures across America are going to take this draft opinion when it is final and deny women these fundamental life and death decisions about their future and about their families.
Some Democrats, including California Governor Gavin Newsom, have responded as you are responding. But Newsom's also arguing that national Democrats are not doing enough to fight this. Take a listen.
Where the hell's my party? Where's the Democratic Party? You guys paying attention? Why aren't we standing up more firmly, more resolutely? Why aren't we calling this out? This is a concerted, coordinated effort. And yes, they're winning. They are. They have been. We need to stand up. Where's the counteroffensive?
So where is the counteroffensive, Senator?
Every one of us is standing up, speaking out, rallying, marching, talking to our constituents, lifting up their voices and their stories. This is the biggest fight of a generation, Jake. And if America's people, America's women and men who love them, do not fight, right now we will lose the basic right to make decisions, to have bodily autonomy, and to decide what our futures look like. This is a fundamental moment for advocacy and for not giving up. And so what I'm doing and what many of my colleagues are doing are pushing for a vote next week. We are going to be aggressive with all our colleagues and with our Republican allies to vote for codifying Roe v. Wade. We are not giving up. We will never give in, and we will keep fighting. And if the American people are paying attention, this issue will also be on the ballot in November. We need to make sure that every single voter understands that the Republican Party and Mitch McConnell does not believe that their daughters, that their mothers, that their sisters have rights to make fundamental life and death decisions. We are half citizens under this ruling, and if this is put into law, it changes the foundation of America.
As you note, the Senate's going to vote Wednesday on legislation that would codify Roe v. Wade. As you know, Democrats don't have the votes. You don't have 60 to get to a vote, and I don't even know if you have 50 to pass it because Senator Manchin, I believe, opposes it. So you and others have called on the Senate to eliminate the filibuster. Senate Minority Leader Mitch McConnell said this weekend he thinks that a national abortion ban, so not sending it back to the states, but just banning it everywhere, banning it in New York, banning it in California, banning it in Washington, D.C. McConnell said that he thinks a national abortion ban is possible. Is it not true that if you eliminate the filibuster to pass this and then Republicans win control of Congress down the road, they can ban abortion nationwide with just 50 votes?
Look, Jake, the argument that if we take away the filibuster, Mitch McConnell and Republicans across the country are going to do bad things. Those bad things are literally already happening. We have a Supreme Court that is unrelated to the normal process of the American people. When those Supreme Court justices says that that precedent is the foundation of our legal system, and said Roe v. Wade is precedent that's entitled to respect under the laws of stare decisis, and imply to every person in America that they have no agenda to overrule Roe v. Wade, and then go ahead and do it. We've changed what is protecting our rights and privileges in America in a way that no person imagined would happen. And so I don't think the argument is that Mitch McConnell will do bad things is persuasive at this point. They're already happening. He already took away justice from Barack Obama. He already stacked the court with ultra-conservative justices. They already now have a ruling that may well be applied in many contexts. Because when you say life, liberty, and pursuit of happiness does not create some right to privacy, then every other right under a right to privacy could be at risk, whether it's LGBTQ equality, whether it's marriage equality, whether it's literally any right that has been decided over the past 50 years. 4 justices in the last hearings that I've witnessed have said that precedent matters and that precedent is the foundation of our legal system. And so if they just feel they can just upend this precedent because they don't like it today, well, that's inconsistent with what they promised the judges, what they promised the senators who voted for them. And if you look at the statements of both Susan Collins and Lisa Murkowski, they truly believe their statements were inconsistent with what they told them.
No, I know. And you've said that the 5 Supreme Court justices lied in their confirmation hearings when they said that Roe v. Wade was precedent and settled law. Are you accusing them of committing perjury?
You know, I come at this issue from the perspective of a lawyer who worked in fraud all the time, corporate fraud. If a corporation put these kind of statements in their quarterly filings, they would be seen to be purposefully misleading and would be deemed fraud. So I think all their statements should be looked at very, very carefully. And I think they misled the Senate with the intention of getting their confirmation vote with the intention of overruling Roe. And so I'm very concerned that these justices have crossed a line that no one believed would be crossed. That they would purposefully create the impression that they would not overrule settled precedent, and that it was not only deserving of due weight and the importance of precedent, but because it had been reaffirmed that it deserves more weight, and then go ahead and overturn it, especially with the reasoning that Justice Alito makes in this draft opinion. It's outrageous. And so, Jake, back to the point. I think we should get rid of the filibuster. I think we should vote for our values. I believe we should fight for everything we believe in at this moment. This is about basic equality. It's about whether women in America have a right to make these decisions, whether they have a right to decide who and when they have children with, under what circumstances. It's unconscionable. And not only is the governor who you just had on outrageous in his views, but there are legislators and governors like him that are going to undermine all access to any type of reproductive freedom. And they are setting to criminalize abortion, to call it homicide. You look what happening in Louisiana today. It is it's bone-chilling because it's taking away women's right for life, liberty, and pursuit of happiness, our right to be a full citizen, our right. And the point I made that you played, you know, America's men need to wake up. They are literally, they have to imagine what it would be like for 10 months to have zero bodily autonomy, to not know what's going to happen to your body, whether you're going to survive a pregnancy, whether you will be forever changed medically. These are the consequences of bringing a pregnancy to full term. And so when women make that decision to have a baby, it is a joyful decision that they are making. But if you take away that right and require forced pregnancies, you are literally undermining their basic civil rights, their basic human rights, and their ability to decide what happens to their body.
Senator Kirsten Gillibrand of New York, thank you so much for your time today. Appreciate it. Tomorrow, Russia celebrates its Victory Day holiday, but they haven't won in Ukraine. A new report says Putin may issue a doomsday warning. I'll ask UN Ambassador Linda Thomas-Greenfield next. Welcome back to State of the Union. I'm Jake Tapper. We have some breaking news for you now. First Lady Jill Biden has made an unannounced visit to Ukraine, part of her humanitarian visit to the region. The First Lady made the Mother's Day visit at a southwestern border town, touring a converted school that now serves as temporary housing for internally displaced Ukrainians. And she met with the First Lady of Ukraine, Olena Zelenska, who has not been in public since the start of the war in February. The visit, a strong sign of support from the U.S. for Ukraine, as Russia is preparing to celebrate Victory Day tomorrow, which marks the Soviet Union's defeat of the Nazis. But this year, the whole victory part in Ukraine is conspicuously missing. Joining us now, the U.S. Ambassador to the United Nations, Linda Thomas-Greenfield. Ambassador Thomas-Greenfield, happy Mother's Day. Tomorrow is May 9th.
Thank you.
It's a major Russian military holiday called Victory Day. Russia celebrates the defeat of Nazi Germany. Reuters is reporting that for the first time in more than a decade, Russia is going to conduct a flyover with its so-called doomsday plane that would protect top Russian officials in the occurrence of a nuclear war. Would the Biden administration view that as an escalation?
You know, the Russians have escalated throughout this process, and part of that escalation has been a consequence of their failures. They have nothing to celebrate tomorrow. They have not succeeded in defeating the Ukrainians. They've not succeeded in dividing the world or dividing NATO. And they have only succeeded in isolating themselves internationally and becoming a pariah state around the globe. So what they're celebrating tomorrow is their own lack of success.
A senior Ukrainian official says a Russian aircraft dropped a bomb on a school in the Luhansk region of Ukraine overnight, completely destroying it. It is where people had been sheltering. I think about 90 people had been sheltering. And the Ukrainian official says most likely 60 of those 90 have been killed. Is that a war crime?
We have called out the Russians very early on for committing war crimes, and this contributes to that. We're going to continue to work with the Ukrainian prosecutors and others to document evidence of their war crimes so that they can be held accountable. This just adds to the long list that we already have.
CNN has learned that the U.S. provided intelligence that helped Ukraine target the Moskva, that Russian warship that's now at the bottom of the Black Sea. This comes after the New York Times reported that U.S. intelligence is helping Ukraine locate Russian generals that Ukraine then kills. It does seem like the Biden administration is in this weird dance of semantics in terms of this intelligence and in terms of what the U.S. and the Biden administration acknowledge the intelligence is doing. So the U.S. is supplying deadly weapons, financial aid, intelligence that allows Ukraine to kill Russians. At what point is this just a proxy war that the U.S. is fighting against Russia, but the U.S. is not the one pulling the trigger? Where's the line there?
The line is where the Russians started. The Russian government invaded Ukraine. They started this war. They are attacking the Ukrainian people, and we have been consistent since the start that we will support Ukraine. We will provide them with the wherewithal to fight this war. And they are on the ground, and they are pushing back the Russians. So we will continue to provide the kinds of support that they need. We provided intelligence, but they make the decisions on what they will target and how they will target. And again, I think Russia has felt the consequences of our support for the Ukrainians.
Right, but I guess what I'm getting at is there's this reluctance to acknowledge that we are giving this intelligence to the Ukrainians so they can do what they then do with it. I mean, we're not giving them the location of a Russian general so that they can, you know, order Uber Eats for them. It's with the express purpose of, here is where this Russian general is, go do what you're going to do, and then the Ukrainians kill them.
We're providing them with the intelligence so that they can defend themselves against Russian aggression, and also put them in a position where they're stronger at the negotiating table against the Russians. How they use that intelligence is up to them, but what we want to make sure is that they have the equipment and the information, the wherewithal to fight this war in a way that helps them to defend their own sovereignty.
Speaker Pelosi's called for the Biden administration to designate Russia as a state sponsor of terrorism. She said, quote, if Russia's not listed as a state sponsor of terrorism, tear up the list. Will you do that? Will you not tear up the list? Will you put Russia on the list?
Well, I think Russia has put itself on that list of state sponsors of terror. They are carrying out terror acts against the Ukrainian people, against Ukrainian civilians. You just mentioned they attacked a school with 90 people. Imagine the terror that these people felt as the school was being attacked. So they have defined their role on that list. It's not necessary for us to put them on.
So you think that they deserve to be on the list, but you're not saying that the Biden administration is going to put them on the list?
They certainly deserve to be called out for the acts of terror that they are committing. We've said that they've committed war crimes. We've indicated that what they are doing is trying to destroy Ukraine's actual existence. Mm-hmm. And what we have seen, you and others reporting, is unconscionable. Yeah. And they need to be held account for it.
First Lady Jill Biden, as I mentioned, just made an unannounced trip to Ukraine. You can see her now. We're going to show the video of her greeting and hugging the Ukrainian First Lady during this humanitarian trip to the region. Will we see President Biden in Ukraine sometime soon?
Well, I can't preview what the president's travel is going to be, but I can say that the First Lady's visit has to have given so much support and encouragement to the Ukrainian women and children. And for her to go there on Mother's Day to meet with the Ukrainian First Lady, I think sends a very strong, a very positive message. I met with Ukrainian mothers on the border when I traveled to Romania and Moldova a few weeks ago. I see the strength that these women have. So having the First Lady there, encouraging them, supporting them, actually in Ukraine, I think sends a strong message of support and commitment that the U.S. government has to supporting Ukrainians moving forward.
This weekend, we learned that a new decree from the Taliban requires Afghan women to cover their faces and publicly, they're especially pushing the traditional burqa. If women don't, they or their male guardian, that's what it's called, their male guardian, can be fired from their jobs, they can be jailed. Doesn't this underline even further the problem of the U.S. withdrawal without a competent government in place?
You know, it shows again what the Taliban are capable of. We said from day one, we will judge them by their actions, not their words. And these actions on Mother's Day, I think, sends a very chilling message across the world. We have done everything possible to support Afghan women, and will continue to call out the Taliban for their actions, both the United States, but also in my role in the Security Council as president of the Security Council. What they did today is unconscionable, and I am sure that we can expect more from them, and it just redoubles our commitment to supporting Afghan women moving forward.
Happy Mother's Day, Madam Ambassador. Thanks for joining us today. We appreciate it. If the Supreme Court does decide to overturn Roe v. Wade, are other landmark decisions next? Our panel is here to discuss. Stay with us.
Roe versus Wade is an important precedent of the Supreme Court. It's been on the books for a long time.
Roe versus Wade, decided in 1973, is a precedent of the United States Supreme Court. It has been reaffirmed.
It is an important precedent of the Supreme Court. By it, I mean Roe v. Wade and Planned Parenthood versus Casey.
Welcome back to State of the Union. I'm Jake Tapper. Our panel's here now. Let me just dive right in. Hillary Rosen. First of all, Hillary and Carrie, happy Mother's Day to both of you. Hillary Rosen, let me start with you because Senator Gillibrand basically said that those justices committed a form of fraud. She wouldn't go so far as to say perjury. What do you think?
Well, first of all, how nice to be here on Mother's Day and defend not just mothers, but people who aren't ready to be mothers or don't want to be mothers today. Look, I think that these justices have made Senate confirmation hearings to the Supreme Court a sham, and that is too bad. I don't know what can be done about that other than senators have to pay much more attention in the future to what they're saying and how to hold them more accountable in these hearings. But look, I think, you know, one of the problems we have is this just general level of uncertainty and fear about not just this decision, but how far it goes. And I think that that's the unknown that we're, you know, worried about most, and as we see the impact of this decision. Like, I would ask you, where are you going to go after this? Once you get this decision, what are you going to do? Are you going to go after other unenumerated rights, like same-sex marriage, like the rights to privacy? What's the plan? Because you're taking away people's personhood with this activity.
You know, so first of all, we all just heard what the justices said. They were making descriptive statements. They were very careful not to pledge how they would rule in a future case because they know they can't. And that's something that the liberal justices have done as well. So that is clearly here. I think it's important to remember what the case goes out of its way to make clear, which is that, no, this doesn't impact those other rights. That's an argument that was brought before the court, and the court made it very clear. So rather than going against the explicit text of that decision, let's talk about what the decision really does.
So you're committed to not going after other rights after Roe. Is that what you're saying?
This decision has no impact.
Is that a yes?
My goal is here. My goal isn't to go after one thing or another. My goal is to have a court that follows the Constitution and the laws passed. If Americans want to pass laws that say one thing or another, the courts need to follow them faithfully. Same with the Constitution. If you want to change that, go ahead, but the court needs to follow
Let me just bring up what Carrie's talking about, which is this excerpt of the Alito provision, which says the Constitution makes no reference to abortion and no such right is implicitly protected by any constitutional provision. None of the other decisions cited by Roe and Casey involve the critical moral question posed by abortion. They do not support the right to obtain an abortion. By the same token, our conclusion that the Constitution does not confer such right does not undermine them in any way. In other words, he is saying, I know you don't buy it.
No. It's not that, respectfully, it's not that I don't buy it. It's just intellectually dishonest. Because what else is not in the Constitution? You talk about a right to privacy. Marriage is not in the Constitution. Homosexuality is not in the Constitution. Consensual sex is not in the Constitution. And so what we do know is that this court will take the next step. Anybody who says they won't is just not paying attention. This court is coming after same-sex marriage. This court is coming after Loving. This court is coming after Brown v. Board. There's no reason.
I just think that, with all due respect, I just think that's just a non-starter. The idea that, first of all, Clarence Thomas wants to rule that his own marriage is unconstitutional strikes me as implausible. Second of all, Loving was more about an equal protection case, which is what Ruth Bader Ginsburg wanted to ground abortion rights in, which would have been a much better cause. Look, the simple fact is like I agree with you that philosophically, this decision, if it ends up being the real decision, which is a big if, does philosophically does threaten some other rights like gay marriage, and it does not. But as a practical matter, there is no movement to ban interracial marriage in this country. There's not even a movement on the right yet to overturn Obergefell and gay marriage. I just don't think.
Ben Shapiro just recently, this week on his podcast, which is with the largest YouTube podcast or whatever it may be, talked about the fact that the next thing they need to do is go after gay marriage. And so, if Hillary and I are afraid of what this court will do next, I think that is rooted in the history of this country. And this is the first time, and I don't think anybody can deny this, this is the first time that the United States Supreme Court actually inherently took away a constitutional right.
That is not true. In fact, look at Lochner versus United States, the case that said that there was a right to contract. It's a case that has been dissed by every judge ever. They overturned it. The court regularly overturns cases, and including cases
I didn't say
taking away a
what I said.
Right, but that took away the understanding that there was a right to contract in the case.
Changing a business decision is a little bit different than taking away what women have depended on for 50 years.
Let's talk about
to manage
let's talk about what this will
personal
happen.
lives and their personal health. And what we will have here
Yeah.
is a very divided United States.
So let's talk about that.
Between rich and poor, between where people live. And, you know, women like me, we are always going to have access to good health care and reproductive rights. But poor women who can't move out of Mississippi with their governor being so radical, who can't travel, who aren't working for corporations willing to subsidize their travel to get reproductive support, they're not going to have that.
So, Carrie, let me come right to you with what she's talking about, because we just talked about with Governor Reeves in Mississippi. He has a trigger law, or a snapback law, whatever it's called, so that if Roe is overturned, abortions will become illegal in Mississippi. Let's show the map here. There are 13 states that have these trigger laws. 6 states have pre-Roe bans that will come back. And then 16 states have abortion protection laws. So it does look as though a post-Roe America, there will be some of the country, I think it's more than 50% in population, that will have no legal abortion, and half of the country, or a little less, that will have legal abortion. Is that unfair to say?
Look, the role of the Supreme Court, and a lot of the arguments I'm hearing today are policy arguments. You think it's a good idea to have more access to abortion. You think it's better to have more access for fetal life. That's not what the court is here to decide. The court only should overturn laws that are elected by our democratically elected representatives when they actually violate the Constitution. That doesn't mean what you wish was in the Constitution. That doesn't mean things that were like emanations of penumbras of the Constitution. It's what's in there. And if Americans want to pass a constitutional amendment that say that, great. But practically speaking, there's also a lot of states, California, New York, they're going to have the opposite. Abortion, 9 months, maybe more protections than Roe provided. The American people are going to be able to decide how to balance this very difficult
Respectfully,
issue.
that comes with a certain privilege, because the Constitution doesn't discuss a lot of things. The Constitution doesn't discuss me being fully human, a full part of this country. It doesn't discuss Hillary. I mean, the Constitution doesn't discuss a lot of things, and so there's a certain level.
The amended Constitution does.
I mean, there's a certain level of privilege that goes along with this theory that the Constitution protects all of us and we should just leave it alone. What Hillary is talking about is so true, because right now, black and brown women, poor women who live in Mississippi, who live in Louisiana, who live in Texas, are not going to have access to quality health care. White women who have the ability and the means to travel across state lines will. Abortions are not going to disappear. Abortions are going to become less safe, and that's dangerous.
Yeah, look, that is a perfectly legitimate policy argument to make. But as Carrie's point is like, look, I personally think that you can be pro-choice and still think Roe should be overturned because it's really badly written, not grounded in the Constitution. There are lots of liberal critics of Roe as constitutional law. I think it's really interesting how quickly so many of the people who oppose this draft, which again is a draft, I don't think it's going to look like this.
I agree
final
with
thing. Immediately go to arguments about other things rather than actually talking about the merits or lack thereof of Roe and of abortion rights. You know, it's fine to be concerned about gay marriage rights and these other things, but you'd think overturning Roe would be enough, and yet President Biden on down have all gone to these other arguments, and I think that's interesting.
This is revisionist history, I'm sorry. All those justices went there and said this is settled law. They didn't go there and say this was wrongly decided.
Did you hear them say settled law? They said it's a precedent of the court.
Not wrongly decided based on the wrong things, etc. I'm sorry. This is just a red herring.
What's revisionist?
And so you can't go back and say, oh, well, the only reason this is happening is because it was decided on the wrong amendment. It was wrongly decided. It is happening because of a majority of the court are making a moral decision for people against the country. Look, I don't want to
moral decision to send the moral decision back down to states and let state legislatures make the decision. There's nothing in here that says you have to be pro-choice or pro-life in the decision. It says states should work it out themselves.
They are doing it for a moral and political reason, and that is the only thing that they're.
We do everything in politics for moral and political.
This isn't the politics.
I don't think we should be only ranting at the Supreme Court here, though. I think that current leaders like President Biden and like people in the Senate and the Congress and governors across the country have a responsibility. Technology is actually ahead of the game on the court here.
Yeah.
With medications, with other things. There should be education. There should be other ways to do this. And I think we can get there.
We're hitting the clock.
We have to go.
To be continued. Great panel. We'll have you back again. This issue isn't going away. And as you noted, this is not even officially the draft opinion, or the official opinion. It is the draft opinion, not the official opinion. I cannot let you go, however, though, without recognizing a few amazing moms on this Mother's Day, to my wife, Jennifer, to my mom and my stepmom and my mother-in-law, my sister, my sisters-in-law, my co-anchor, Dana Bash, the three moms who help run this show while also dealing with toddlers and babies, not including me. And to all the moms who watch, we love you, we appreciate you, we're so grateful for you today and every day. Fareed Zakaria picks up right now.
This is GPS, the Global Public Square. Welcome to all of you in the United States and around the world. I'm Fareed Zakaria, coming to you live from New York. On the program, Russia will celebrate a victory tomorrow, its defeat of the Nazis in World War II. This year, the holiday will almost certainly focus on Ukraine. But what would victory look like there for either side, and who is most likely to achieve it? We will explore. Also, as America gets ready to mark 1 million dead from COVID, Bill Gates says we are not out of danger yet, not even close. I will talk to him about the pandemic and the inevitable next one. But first, here's my take. As the prospect of Roe versus Wade being overturned looms large and America braces for another round of culture wars, I've been puzzling about why clashes over values seem to be more intense in the United States than elsewhere, and why the competing camps seem more divided than before. One key to this might be found in a 2020 Pew survey showing that on many cultural issues, the American political divide was the widest among rich countries surveyed. Asked whether the country would be better off in the future if it sticks to its traditions and ways of life, 65% of Americans on the right said yes, versus just 6% on the left, a 59-point gap. That compares with a 19-point gap in tradition-bound France. Asked whether being Christian was a crucial aspect of being a citizen of the country, the gap in America was 23 points compared to just 7 points in the UK. These attitudes are fleshed out further in a 2018 Pew survey, which asked people in several rich countries whether religion should play a larger role in their societies. In America, 71% of people who identified as conservative said yes, while just 29% of liberals agreed. That difference, 42 percentage points, was off the charts compared to the other countries. The gap was 17 points larger than those in the next highest countries analyzed, Canada and Poland, and roughly 4 times the gap between right and left in Sweden and Germany. In the UK, 35% of conservatives wanted religion to play a larger role in their country versus 28% of liberals, a mere 7-point gap. So why is America exceptionally polarized? It's a tough question to answer. Many of the forces that seem to be at work, globalization, technological change, immigration, are happening in other Western societies as well. In fact, if you use the size of trade in a country's economy as a measure, America is less globalized than many European countries. It's not even special when it comes to immigration. Canada and Sweden have a larger share of foreign-born people in their societies than does the United States. And of course, technology is at work everywhere. In his last book, Religion's Sudden Decline, the distinguished social scientist Ronald Inglehart offered an answer. Inglehart pointed out that the most striking cultural shift of our times is the decline in religiosity in most countries. When Inglehart and his colleague Pippa Norris analyzed survey data on attitudes toward religion from 1981 to 2007, they found that most of the countries studied had become more religious. But between 2007 and 2020, the overwhelming majority became less religious. The standout in the recent studies is the US of A. For a long time, America was the outlier in showing that rich, advanced countries can still be religious. In recent years, though, it has been reversing course to dramatic effect. Since 2007, the U.S. has been secularizing more rapidly than any other country for which we have data, notes Engelhardt. Adding, by one widely recognized criterion, it now ranks as the 12th least religious country in the world. Engelhardt explains that this process of secularization has many causes, mostly relating to the decline of group norms, of mechanisms of control, and the rise of individualism. But here's the interesting part. As this broad shift is taking place in the U.S., it is coinciding with increased polarization. So the picture that emerges is of a country that is rapidly secularizing, but at the same time seeing a strong backlash to that process. Big changes are leading to big reactions. There are other factors at work. As always in America, race relations play an important role. This is one other area where the differences between left and right are much more marked than in other countries, as can be seen from the 2020 Pew survey. All of this highlights a new reality. You cannot really understand America anymore by looking at averages. It has become two countries. One is urban, more educated, multiracial, secular, and largely left of center. The other is rural, less educated, religious, white, and largely right of center. Engelhardt and the scholar Christian Welzel have a famous cultural map that plots countries according to their responses to questions about values. As of 2020, America was something of an outlier in the Western world, closer to countries like Uruguay and Vietnam than to Sweden and Denmark. But if one were to divide America into two countries, one red and one blue, I suspect that you would see that blue America would fit comfortably with Northern European Protestant countries, while red America's cultural values would move it closer to Nigeria and Saudi Arabia. For the country's political future, the central question is now this: can these two Americas find a way to live, work, tolerate, and cooperate with one another? If not, the abortion battle may be the precursor to even larger struggles. Go to cnn.com/Fareed for a link to my Washington Post column this week. And let's get started. Earlier this week, 8 MiG fighters practiced flying over Moscow's Red Square in a Z formation. Z has become Russia's cryptic one-letter symbol to show support for its war in Ukraine. Tomorrow, the jets will be taking part in a parade for Russia's annual Victory Day, which commemorates the defeat of the Nazis in 1945. 77 years later, however, no such Russian victory over Ukraine is in sight. I want to bring in Jennifer Gaffarella. She is the Chief of Staff and National Security Fellow at the Institute for the Study of War. Welcome, Jennifer. Tell us, we're all trying to understand. We get that phase one, trying to take over Kyiv in 2 or 3 days, failed for the Russians. But who is winning phase two, the war taking place in the south and east of Ukraine?
So phase two is still, unfortunately, in its early stages. There's a lot of war left to be fought. However, what we're seeing on the ground is Ukrainian forces able, first, to blunt Russian attempts to advance on multiple axes in eastern Ukraine, but also in recent days, Ukrainian forces succeeding in sustaining a counteroffensive around one of the contested towns of Kharkiv and pushing Russian forces back. They're pushing Russian forces back so effectively that they now have a chance, the Ukrainian forces, to advance to the Russian border, and we have the Russians destroying bridges as they are retreating. That's an important indicator of the potential that Ukraine will be able to mount a larger counteroffensive in coming weeks and potentially even begin to retake serious ground.
But what about the level of destruction the Russians are wrecking? I mean, if you look at a place like Mariupol, technically they don't control it, but they've emptied the city, they've destroyed 90% of the buildings. Is that part of a kind of strategy that the Russians have?
Putin's ambition in Ukraine is to eliminate Ukraine as a nation and as an identity, as a people. And so we see with the Russian advances into Ukraine, a genocidal attempt to erase what it means to be Ukrainian and to, in some cases, try to eliminate Ukrainian villages completely from the map. But I think it's important to note that while Putin's offensives and his aims are destructive, he's nowhere near achieving his actual political goals. And that's where we really need to evaluate the success or failure of the Russians and the Ukrainians. Strategically, Ukrainians are fighting for their right to live, their right to exist as a nation, and they're succeeding in that. They won the first phase of the war, but they've also maintained their unity and they've rallied NATO and the Western world to their defense. That's incredibly important. And while that doesn't mean that Ukrainians are suffering any less on the ground, it does mean Ukraine has a chance to win this war and to rebuild.
The fear is that Russia will be able to pour many more men, soldiers into this fight, especially if at the May Day celebrations, Putin were to formally declare war rather than a special military operation. If that happened, does that change the game in the sense that the Russians now have recruits whom they can pour into Ukraine?
There's a lot more ifs, and so the answer is not necessarily. First and foremost, new mobilized recruits won't necessarily be combat effective, certainly anytime soon. So the question is, how seriously and how capably are the Russians going to train these forces? The Russians have already taken incredibly high casualties in their experienced and combat effective units, and sending in individual replacements for killed or wounded soldiers does not actually recreate effective and cohesive combat formations. The other factor here is that it takes time, right? And so we have mobilization on the Russian side, which will take weeks, if not months, but we have momentum on the Ukrainian side. And I think it's very essential for the United States and the West to recognize that now is the time to support Ukraine, because even if Russia declares a general mobilization, it doesn't mean that Ukraine can't actually still win this war.
And finally, Jennifer, what would it take? You said to me previously, this is a war that is going to be decided by artillery. Explain what you mean and what Ukraine needs.
So the United States has significantly increased the amount of artillery we're providing to the Ukrainians, which is essential, but the Ukrainians still need more. They need a more robust pipeline, which means that these weapon systems and resupply needs to get to the Ukrainians essentially before they need it, not at the last minute. But the Ukrainians are also asking for more advanced systems and systems that will provide them more range, which is going to be essential as the Ukrainians attempt to go on the counteroffensive, which requires them to strike Russian targets in more depth and overpower Russian forces that are attempting to dig in order to prevent exactly those kinds of losses to Ukraine.
Jennifer, that is a fascinating set of insights. Thank you so much. Next on GPS, the humanitarian crisis caused by this war. Nearly 6 million refugees have fled Ukraine, and those are the ones lucky enough to have gotten out. When we come back. The First Lady, Jill Biden, ventured into Ukraine today after spending time on this Mother's Day across the border in Slovakia, meeting with mothers and children who had fled the war zone. They are among the nearly 6 million Ukrainian refugees from the war. Those left behind in Ukraine face homelessness, hunger, injury, and death. It is safe to say that Ukraine is a humanitarian nightmare. David Miliband is just back from there. He is the president and CEO of the International Rescue Committee and, of course, the former British Foreign Secretary. David, tell us what you can about where you were and what you can tell us of, you know, the state and mood of the Ukrainian people.
Yeah, I was in Moldova and in central Ukraine visiting International Rescue Committee staff and clients. And three things come through overwhelmingly strongly from every conversation. First, the sheer scale of the displacement as a result of the fighting. You've rightly highlighted 6 million refugees into neighboring states. But there's at least that number of people, 6, 7, 8 million, on the run inside their own country. Just for perspective, it took 3 months for 1 million people to flee Syria. This war has been going on for not 3 months, and we've got 12, 13, 14 million people on the run. Secondly, fear stalks every conversation. An inch below the surface, there's desperate fear of a phone call that a husband, a father, a brother has been killed. And as I was talking to women from Ukraine in Moldova, one of them gets a phone call from Odessa saying, "It's my son, there's a missile strike. Excuse me, I have to go and talk to him." So the fear is right close to the surface. Thirdly, I can say that the overwhelming humanitarian response in the Western world to donate money and support means that this is a much better funded humanitarian response than in other parts of the world. Many times more funds are available, and that means organizations like the IRC, we can deliver the support for healthcare, deliver the cash assistance that allows people to buy in the shops, because there is normality in large parts of the country, despite the fact that missile strikes are taking place.
So is the Ukrainian government in this chaos and war, is it actually functioning in that sense?
Yes, that's a very important point. In many parts of the world, it's the UN that has to organize a health cluster or a cash support cluster. Here, you've got a Ukrainian government in large parts of the country organizing the health system, making sure that different parts of the country are getting the supplies that they need. International NGOs, local civil society is working closely. There's also a functioning economy, which is absolutely critical. The best thing you can do for someone who's in humanitarian distress is to give them some cash so that they can actually support themselves through the local economy. People having to rent in Europe if they've arrived, but also inside Ukraine, that's very important. One other thing, often people think that the trauma side of this, the mental health side of this, is a sideshow. It's absolutely central. Every single person is traumatized by what they and their country are going through. And of course, they don't know how long this is going to go on. The response in Germany, where I also was, people I met, they were housing Ukrainians. And it's one thing to do it for 2 days, 2 weeks, 2 months. They don't know if this is going to be 2 years. And that's requiring a massive mobilization. Because of course, if the sort of fighting that your previous guest, Jennifer, from the Institute for the Study of War, if that fighting carries on, if that offensive carries on, you could have another 5 million fleeing into Europe, and that becomes a huge logistical as well as political challenge.
So what you're describing is a situation that's fairly normal because you are not in the places where there was the most active fighting going on. But weren't there missile strikes, and what does that do to a city to sort of randomly and sporadically have these missiles destroying civilian areas?
It really is a great point, because what you've got is a split screen. You've got a really 20th century sort of war going on in the east and in the south, battle lines. You've been hearing about Kharkiv this morning. And then in the rest of the country, you have something much more asymmetric. You just don't know when the missile strike's going to come. Odessa, Venezia, Kyiv itself, Lviv. And that increases the fear, and that's increasing the flow of people, even though it's not a front line. And I think it's really important that we keep that in mind as we think about planning for different scenarios, humanitarian scenarios, going forward.
You then went from Ukraine to Germany. Everyone is wondering, are the Germans fully behind this? There is this, the spat going on even between the Ukrainian government and the German government, because the Germans have been so pro-Russian. The Ukrainians would argue, certainly the Social Democrats, dependent on Russian energy. What is your sense of whether Germany has really transformed itself on this issue?
I think it has, and I think there's a really important category error being made around the world, especially in some of the commentary. Germans at an elite level, some of whom I met at the senior reaches of government, but also at a local level, they've really made a fundamental move in their own geopolitical positioning and their own assessment of Russia. However, they do this with deliberation, with caution, with the opposite of machismo. There's no machismo about doubling your defense budget in Germany. There's a real sense of responsibility arising from history. And I think it's incredibly important that we don't mistake this caution, this deliberation, with an absence of determination. I felt from the German leadership that I met, but also from German civil society, they know that this is deadly serious. They know it requires fundamental change in how they position themselves, but they're also know that they've got to be in it for the long haul, and that takes real care, real planning, real determination.
And I suppose for people in Europe and the world, it is not a bad thing that there is not too much German machismo.
No, that's the point, and we should, I think, be humble about that, because there's determination, but they know their history, and we should know it too.
David Miliband, always a pleasure.
Thank you.
Next on GPS, Bill Gates and how to prevent the next pandemic. Nearly 15 million people around the world have died as a result of the pandemic, according to estimates out this week from the WHO. And we are about to hit a new grim milestone, 1 million confirmed dead from the disease in the U.S.
If anything,
Bill Gates started sounding the alarm about pandemics long before COVID emerged, and he's become one of the world's most important figures on public health. His new book is How to Prevent the Next Pandemic. I started the interview, though, on a topic that has been pushing COVID out of the headlines. Bill Gates, pleasure to have you on.
Good to talk to you.
So since we last talked, small thing has happened. Russia has invaded Ukraine, and it feels like we're in a new world. We are going to be seeing higher energy prices, higher food prices for years to come. It seems difficult to see how this resolves itself very quickly. What does that say to you about the economic outlook for the next few years?
Well, it comes on top of the pandemic, where government debt levels were already very, very high, and there were already some supply chain problems. And so it's, likely to accelerate the inflationary problems that rich world economies have, and, force an increase in interest rates that eventually will result in an economic slowdown. So I'm afraid the bears on this one have a pretty strong argument that concerns me a lot, particularly because the poor countries, whenever the rich countries have these big budget problems, the health needs of places like Africa get deprioritized.
Let's talk about the book. What's really important, it seems to me, is that you're reminding us that not only is this pandemic not over, but we need to try to think about how to prevent the next one, and not forget that that's still, that we didn't do so well on the last one. But first, let's just talk about you've made the point that you could end up with variants that are transmissible and more lethal. I think we've tended to assume that what you're going to see is an extension of the pattern we've seen, which is more transmissible variants, but much less lethal. You're saying that it doesn't have to keep going that way.
No, we've been lucky, and I think there's a good chance we'll keep being lucky. But you could see a variant that had worse health effects. Right now, the COVID is very dangerous for older people or people with some medical conditions, but for a lot of people, not a risk of death. And so we're not out of this one. And a lot of the innovations we need, like vaccines that provide longer protection, broader protection, those can help us for this pandemic, and we need them for the future. I mean, it's hard to overstate how unprepared we were for, what was sadly even somewhat predictable. And so hopefully this is our big wake-up call to, do like we do for earthquake and fire and war, to really, be able to respond correctly.
So, Bill, let's imagine the next pandemic. Okay, it starts up, as many of these have started up somewhere in Asia, probably East Asia, for a whole variety of reasons. What is the Bill Gates plan? What would you like to see happen when the first time you hear about some people getting infected by some kind of airborne virus?
Yeah, the big risk is human-to-human transmissible respiratory virus. You'd like to have a group connected with the World Health Organization that sees that outbreak early and is able to go in and look, sequence what it is, understand the nature of it, have some tools that aren't dependent on the specific pathogen, that you can give people not just masks, but also some drugs to block transmission. And you want to stop it before it gets to lots of countries, which is when it becomes a so-called pandemic. You've got to nip it in the bud. These things are exponential. And so avoiding cases here, saves lots of cases downstream.
You point out in the book that if we had stopped COVID, what was it, by the middle of March, the number of people who would have died would have been, a fraction.
Few percent.
Right,
That's right.
Of what it is now.
Yeah, those first 100 days to recognize you've got a problem and do containment counts a lot. You know, some countries like Australia ended up with 10% of the death rate that the rich countries, including the United States, had. And that was, you know, they moved a bit faster to get diagnosis and quarantine policies in place. And, you know, that's a big difference. 90% of all the lives that we lost would have been saved.
Next on GPS, Bill Gates says we need a germ team. What does that mean? He'll explain.
Want a daily dose of Fareed and his team? Now you can get it with Fareed's Global Briefing, the newsletter that gives you the best insight and analysis on global affairs. Go to cnn.com/Fareed to sign up.
Back now with more of my interview with the multi-billionaire businessman and philanthropist Bill Gates, talking about his new book, How to Prevent the Next Pandemic. So you'd have this group, and it's called GERM.
Exactly.
Spell out the acronym. What is it?
Yeah, that's the Global Epidemic Response and Mobilization Group, GERM, managed by the WHO.
And you think it would cost about $1 billion a year, so not a huge investment.
No, you know, it's tiny. I mean, compared to the numbers we talk about with defense budgets or climate change or
what we ended up
costs.
spending on COVID in terms of the relief we had to give people for the lockdowns, which was in the trillions.
Yes, we're 14 trillion of economic damage and, you know, still counting. And so it's one of the cheapest insurance policies. You've got to make sure that people stay full-time getting us to drill and practice, which is hard for things that don't come along very often. You know, with earthquakes, it's almost good that they're small ones, or fires that you have small ones, because it always reminds you, oh, there could be a big one. In terms of disease going global, doesn't happen much, but it'll be happening more. Either, as you say, Asia's a big risk and Africa's also a big risk, because the boundary between humans and animals is getting closer and closer.
So what strikes me about the book is you don't talk about what seems to me a central dilemma, if not the central dilemma, which is we're living in an age of increasing nationalism. And I can't see, I mean, look at what happened this time. The Chinese government basically refused to allow people in, they did sequence and they shared that. But other than that, they were very protective. How do you get around that?
Well, they, you know, were a bit slower in ringing the alarm bell, both domestically and globally, than they should have been. Some of their scientists worked collaboratively with scientists outside of China and made sure the sequence got out by like January 14th. That was enough time. I do worry that if the outbreak was in a very poor country with bad health structure, unless we have various tripwires where we see and we send in global expertise, it could fester for quite some time. So every day counts in a big way. You know, is the world more nationalistic than the past? You know, the world's always been pretty nationalistic. And yet we're in this together. You know, it's not like China's escaped completely from the ravages. We all participate in the global economy. You know, so I think the World Health Community is up to the task, despite the polarization.
But back to the nationalism, because it does strike me as sort of such a central problem. And we're living with, you know, more tariffs than before. I mean, it's not just China that's doing the made in China, it's India that's doing made in India. When PPP stuff happened, everyone was like, we need to make this stuff at home. There's a much greater sense of resilience, onshoring. In that world, how do you get through this idea that you need a global response, you need a global team, everyone has to be willing to share data?
Well, there are problems like some terrorism things, certainly climate change, where the world has to work together. The supply chain that created these new vaccines was very global. You know, a German company with Turkish immigrants drawing on US-funded science, partnered up with a big, with Pfizer, you know, taking no government money, you know, creating a completely novel vaccine platform that hadn't been used before. There's a lot of great stories about how the world came together. You know, our foundation funded Serum Institute in India, and they ramped up the AstraZeneca-Oxford vaccine and made $1.4 billion. A lot of those got used in India, but, you know, a lot of lives were saved. So if you really get autarkic on health and pandemic issues, you are in very deep trouble. It's okay to fund a few mask factories, but you need all the data coming together. You need information sharing coming together. You need the best scientists who are inventing new drugs and, you know, running trials that will cost many countries. So, you know, I'm not giving up that global cooperation will happen because it's, you know, it's very hard, particularly for the lower income countries, to stop these things without the world working cooperatively.
Looking for silver linings, one of the things you talk about, which I thought was really interesting, is clearly the pandemic causes a lot of mental health issues, distress, and things like that. But you point out that this is an area where digitization has actually provided a surprising kind of upside or a solution. Explain.
Yeah, so the idea of video conferencing was very much a niche thing, even though it's been at World's Fairs, forever. There were a few people who did that, but during the pandemic, any engagement, sales meeting with a doctor, having a funeral, people were forced to say, hey, can we do that digitally? And the software improved a lot. I think the medical vertical, particularly for behavioral mental type consultation, will be forever changed. And we'll all think, do I need to go to that convention or could it be online? My way of engaging with African leaders on health issues was made far more efficient as they had a designated block of time that they set aside for health organizations to take 20-minute blocks and succinctly discuss an issue with them. So I think that is a very positive thing. And the software involved is going to get a lot better. So I wouldn't underestimate that accelerated digitization, including in health and education, substantially.
Finally, Bill, I have to ask you one question. You are probably one of the most admired people in the world, not just in the United States. You make the top of these lists, and people have asked you the secrets for your success. Everything from what do you drink, what do you read. So since we last talked, you have had a setback. As I say, this is somebody who's divorced myself, who a lot of people regard as a failure. Do you regard it as a failure, and what lesson did you draw from it?
Well, certainly I feel bad about mistakes I made that contributed to it. So yes, it's a failure. I'm very lucky that I get to keep working with Melinda, who created the foundation, and we get to take the resources from Microsoft and from Warren Buffett's generosity and have a lot of impact. It's a humbling experience. I don't have the answers in those realms like I hope I do in things like climate technology or vaccine technology.
Bill Gates, thank you, and always a pleasure to have you on.
Thank you.
Next on GPS, Ferdinand and Imelda Marcos will be remembered by history. He for his dictatorial and destructive rule of the Philippines, she for her extraordinary excesses, especially her shoe collection. Despite all that, their son looks likely to be elected president of the Philippines tomorrow. How? That story when we come back. And now for the last look. The tension between liberal democracy and authoritarian populism that we've seen play out across Europe in recent weeks is facing a new test in an entirely different part of the world. I'm talking about the Philippines, where voters will go to the polls on Monday in what one observer called the most consequential election in the country's recent history to choose a president to replace Rodrigo Duterte. But if you think that Duterte's brutal 6-year regime, with its attacks on the press and its deadly war on drugs, have tipped the scales in favor of democracy, you may be wrong. As the journalist Sheila Coronel writes for the FT, the current frontrunner is the only son of the country's notorious former dictator, Ferdinand Marcos, who, alongside his wife Imelda, became international symbols of brutality, excess, and corruption during his decades-long reign. Over his time in office, he accumulated $10 billion by some estimates. As The Guardian writes, he invoked a period of martial law that lasted for nearly a decade, in which tens of thousands of political adversaries, student leaders, and writers were tortured and more than 3,000 killed. It all came to an end in 1986 when hundreds of thousands took to the streets in protest of Marcos's rule and in support of democracy. But the Philippines, like many other countries, has fallen victim to a dangerous backsliding. Ferdinand Marcos Jr., often known as Bong Bong, has refused to apologize for his father's rule. He himself has been convicted of tax evasion and has mischaracterized his education at Oxford. And he has indicated that if elected president, he would protect Duterte against prosecution for his drug war in the International Criminal Court. And yet, Marcos Jr. leads the polls. According to one survey, he's at 58%. His closest competitor, the current Philippines Vice President, Leni Robredo, has run on democratic reform, good governance, transparency. She has criticized Duterte's brutality. And she is polling at around 25%. How did this happen? In part, it is born of the country's failures to fully reckon with its past. Marcos Sr. was never convicted of a crime in the country's courts, some of which are staffed with people appointed during his rule. The billions that the family embezzled have never been fully recovered. Moreover, the dynasty has already lived on. Imelda Marcos, whose thousands of pairs of shoes became an emblem of corruption during her tenure as First Lady, has been elected to the House of Representatives 4 times since her husband's ouster. As for his son, he has benefited from a high degree of nostalgia for the supposed lost glory of his father's rule. Many of Marcos Jr.'s supporters were not alive during the dictatorship. Textbooks tend not to grapple with its brutal legacy. And Marcos is extremely adept at manipulating the message online. As the Washington Post reports, videos abound on YouTube and TikTok that glorify and romanticize the family. Social media is rife with a rosy revisionist history of the dictatorship. Rumors float that if elected, Marcos will distribute gold to the public. This web of disinformation is extremely effective. About 99% of Filipinos are online, and over half of them can't identify fake news when they see it. What's happening in the Philippines is just another version of the same nostalgia-fueled populism we've seen all over the world. But in the context of Russia's invasion of Ukraine, it has newfound resonance. The Philippines' democratic transition occurred 5 years before the fall of the Soviet Union. The Constitution of 1987 was a moment of hope. Crucially, it established term limits. But ultimately, the work was incomplete. Reform stalled. The past was forgotten, then dressed up and paraded as glory. What we see in the Philippines is just one example of the contest playing out across the world. Let's hope for a better outcome there and elsewhere. Thanks to all of you for being part of my program this week. I will see you next week. Don't forget, if you miss a show, go to cnn.com/Fareed for a link to my iTunes podcast.
Hey, I'm Brian Stelter, live in New York on a very poignant Mother's Day. This is Reliable Sources, where we examine the story behind the story, and we find out what's reliable. This hour, a White House source telling me that President Biden is livid about these intel leaks. So were the news outlets right or wrong to publish? Plus, books stacking up against Donald Trump. His former defense secretary is the latest author. We're going to tell you why Mark Esper had to sue his old department to get this book published. And later, the media frenzy around the Johnny Depp Amber Heard trial, why these alerts and memes and posts are unavoidable. There's a lot to get to, but first, one of the biggest scoops in American journalism history. And it was about one of the most polarizing issues in history. We knew the Supreme Court would be ruling on abortion this summer. We knew the conservative majority could roll back Roe v. Wade. We knew this would be a big story in late June. But through Politico's sensational scoop, it has landed early. This report from Monday night about the draft majority opinion, dated February, is by far the most viewed article in Politico's history. It is still dominating news nearly a week later. So this hour, we're going to size up the media coverage with several unique voices, including a former CBS reporter turned Planned Parenthood director and a host on a Catholic news network. But let's begin by going behind the scenes of the Politico bombshell that started it all with one of Politico's top editors, Daphne Linzer. She is the outlet's executive editor, and she's with me now. Daphne, tell me about the moment when you found out that your reporters had obtained this draft majority opinion. What happened?
Well, they were working very hard, our reporters, Josh Gerstein and Alex Ward, to try and confirm what they had and to try and understand it. And our role was to kind of help them and support them so that they could verify the information, understand the context in the moment, as you said, and then get ready to publish.
It seems to me there was a several-day process. I know you're not talking about the timeline in detail, but the White House Correspondents' Dinner was this time last week, and Politico had a big brunch this time last Sunday. And when you were there, you knew this was in the works. Is that right?
You know, it was a kind of extraordinary moment that we were gathering sort of in person for the first time with colleagues from across Washington to celebrate the First Amendment, which is what that dinner is really about. We did publish the next day, the next evening, Monday evening. There was just a few of us in the newsroom that evening. A lot of people still working remotely, so it was quite a moment.
Did you all ever hesitate about publishing? In other words, was there ever a scenario where you would not have published a story about this draft ruling?
I think for us, Brian, there were just two issues for us. Is the document authentic? Do we understand it? And is it in the public interest? Once we knew it was authentic, we knew it was in the public interest, and we were ready to go.
You were 100% sure it was authentic before you published?
We were.
You were. And the story referred to some sort of source saying that the vote count had not changed since February. That implies someone was feeding information that was current, not just from February, but was current. Can you say whether your reporters are still in touch with that source?
I can't talk about the sourcing or that timeline or any aspect of that. I can say that Alex Ward and Josh Gerstein are very seasoned reporters. It's a very seasoned newsroom, reporters with deep experience, and they felt comfortable that we understood not just the draft opinion, but that moment. And understanding that moment was key to understanding where the court was at the time that we were ready to go.
Chief Justice John Roberts announced a leak investigation. He called the leak absolutely appalling. Has Politico been contacted by the court or by authorities investigating the leak?
We have not, and honestly, we don't know more about the investigation than has been made public so far.
Do you expect you will be investigated or pursued?
You know, the chief did not mention publication in his statement, and we don't see any evidence of a crime here.
Because you obtained a document, you published it, it's legit. And so what now? What is Politico working on now? I mean, well, let me ask you this, Daphne. Was the reaction as intense as you expected? What did you expect on Monday night when you hit publish?
Yeah, you know, I think we were all fully aware of just how unprecedented something like this is, to be able to peek inside internal deliberations of the Supreme Court, which is not exactly the most transparent branch of government, and getting a good sense of that, we understood. And as you said, I think, Brian, at the beginning, you talked about how polarizing this is. I think we understood that this was a story, very much a Politico story, actually, because it is as meaningful and as important to people across the political spectrum, that people feel as passionate and invested in the outcome of this case, regardless of their party affiliation.
And there are lots of arguments about the leak, but I don't see people calling out Politico for publishing. It seems like everybody wanted to know what was happening, and you all have given us a preview. Here's one argument. I saw a headline saying, you know, this is good that the Supreme Court's veil of secrecy has been punctured. Do you suspect, and this is a Politico's Jack Schaefer saying that, do you think that's going to happen more often now? You know, is this going to be the new normal for Supreme Court rulings?
It's hard to say. I mean, I'm not really in the prediction business. We did publish, on the night that we published the story, Josh Gerstein had a really important accompanying piece looking at the history of leaks at the Supreme Court. Never one quite like this, but certainly there have been sort of tea leaves and leaks in the past. I do think that the public, again, you know, has a very clear right to know about what's happening, and I don't know how that's going to impact the court and how it proceeds going forward.
What's your number one note about the media coverage going forward? You know, you just joined Politico, you've been at NBC and other outlets. Put on your media critic hat for me. What do we need to put front and center as we cover reproductive rights in the months to come?
Yeah, I think this is a story, you know, again, Politico is going to own, already has owned it, and will cover it from every angle. It's obviously a very passionate topic across the country. People are, as I said, equally invested on both sides, and I think that's something to keep in mind.
Absolutely. Thank you, Daphne. Thanks for coming on.
Thank you, Brian.
Let's bring in some members of our media panel now. Washington Post media reporter Elahe Izadi is with me, and CNN media critic Brian Lowry. Elahe, you wrote about the power of language in the abortion fight. Also did a podcast about that this week. The power of language, what do you mean by that?
Yeah, so when we talk about how media covers really fraught topics such as abortion, the way in which it's framed, even the words that we use to describe any side of a debate are really consequential. So when it comes to abortion, for many years, the media adopted the language and nomenclature of pro-life, which was something that activists on that side of the debate really wanted to be cast as. But you know, this week I had a podcast episode with my colleague Margaret Sullivan, who's a media columnist, and she made the point that when we talk about pro-life in those terms, then what is the opposite side of pro-life? Anti-life? And you know, a lot of media organizations, mainstream media organizations in recent years no longer use that language. They use abortion rights or anti-abortion rights language because they say that that's more precise to what we're talking about. But still, that language is still quite common, and it partly has to do with how we allow people, when our sources, to define themselves. You know, we do defer to people and how they like to be referred to, but it does shape our understanding of what an issue is really about.
And those activists know a lot about the subject. They are deeply invested, but many Americans do not know the details. Let me show some points made by Amelia Thompson DeVoe of 538. She said, Americans' views on abortion are confusing because they don't know much about it. They don't know how pregnancies progress. They don't know when abortions happen. They don't know who gets abortions. They don't know what will happen in their state if Roe is gone. She went on to say Americans don't know much about this because they don't like to think about it. They don't like the politics. They don't like the debate. I thought that was really spot on. People don't like to think about something like this, and a lot of folks don't frankly know the details about reproduction and about reproductive rights. So, Elahe, that seems to me to be a challenge for the media. There's some education to do.
Yeah, and on top of it, I would perhaps put forward that a lot of lawmakers maybe are confused about some of those very topics, and so it does become confusing. And you know, this is an issue in which there is a group of activists who feel very strongly about, and they've been working for decades on this issue, and they're very passionate about it. There are voters who only vote on this issue, but for large segments of the population, they're not thinking about it as much or in such passionate terms. And so it does become, and if it doesn't impact you, then maybe you aren't thinking about it, maybe you aren't educating yourself. And, in some of these states, their abortion is already restricted so heavily, places like Oklahoma and Texas, and that provides a preview of what's to come for the rest of the country.
So I've been doing a lot of reading in the last few days. I think many of us have. Brian Lowry, our CNN media critic. I was reading this morning a Los Angeles Times story about women in Texas making those choices about how to get an abortion and whether they still can, given the state's heartbeat law. Here's what I thought was missing in the story, Brian Lowry. Men. You know what word I think is missing in the news coverage of this? Sex. I went through and looked at the transcripts on cable news this week. Almost no one talks about what causes abortion, what leads to the point of abortion. Brian Lowry, it takes two to tango. But where are the men? Where's the conversation about men and about sex and what's causing this in the first place? Seems to me that's a missing part of a story.
Well, I think that's true. And I think you've seen, it's basically been limited to jokes and memes. If men were subject to abortion laws, this would happen. We really haven't seen not only what it means for women, but what it also means for men. What it means for men. I've seen a few people point to this, what it means for men if women bring children to term that they don't want. But that hasn't been covered enough. And I think the other thing that really hasn't been covered enough, I just watched a documentary that premiered at Sundance called The Janes, which is about an underground abortion network that existed before Roe. And those women are alive. Roe was 49 years ago, but that's in many people's lifetimes. And I don't think we've heard enough voices yet, and we probably will. But, watching that documentary, it really felt like there was an opportunity. We tend to talk about this issue in abstract terms. We see people compare it to The Handmaid's Tale and things like that. But there is real world examples of what it was like in America before Roe versus Wade that can be shared and pointed out to people, and I think would really add a great deal to the discussion.
Right, that's a great point. Let me bring in our other panelist, David French. We were having some tech problems earlier, but he's here with us now. David French, senior editor for The Dispatch and host of the Good Faith podcast. David, what would you add here about media coverage of what appears to be an impending rollback of abortion rights, at least in many states in the U.S.? What do you want people to keep in mind about how this should be covered in the months ahead?
Yeah, I think how it should be covered is informing people first and foremost, because one of the things that we see is that, as was just mentioned, folks don't even know what it means when you say, should Roe v. Wade be overturned? Right. So that, for example, is a virtually useless poll question, because they often interpret it as, should abortion be banned or not banned, which is not what Roe v. Wade is about. It's whether or not, it's who decides. Is it decided by justices of the Supreme Court, or is it decided by voters, either through Congress or through their state legislatures? So there's just an enormous amount of work that has to be done to educate people about what the issues are. And I think also the media needs some education as well. I think the media class is much more intensely focused on this issue than a lot of the rest of Americans, because you're seeing in the polling some rather interesting things that seem to be not really tracking with each other. So, for example, there was a CNN poll that indicated strong American support for at least some degree of abortion rights, but also strong American support for the GOP in the midterm elections. And the GOP is, is the party that is the pro-life party, Democrats' pro-choice party. And so how can that be if there's strong support for abortion rights amongst Americans and they're going to vote Republican? That tells us a lot about relative intensity. How much do people care about this issue? And I think sometimes the media, because it's so glued to Twitter, often misses the fact that abortion is really downstream from a lot of people's lives in the United States of America. We're part of this American class that's super focused on this issue, and an awful lot of Americans are not.
I agree with that, and I think many people don't want to think about it until they're confronted by it when it's national news. There's a lot more here, so let's everybody stick around, take a quick break here. Coming up, we're going to get into the handoff, the latest on this handoff at the White House, the press secretary podium. But first, 1 year ago, she was a CBS News reporter. Now she works for Planned Parenthood. What Kate Smith has to say about the media's coverage of Roe v. Wade. She is up next. With the Supreme Court set to overturn Roe v. Wade, according to that Politico scoop, you'd think that right-wing media outlets and anti-abortion activists would be celebrating. But there's been, in some quarters, a downplaying of the news and a focus instead on the leak. There's also this factor here from the Washington Post. Religious leaders more divided on abortion than some Americans might think. And here's another headline saying this is and is not the moment that pro-life evangelicals have been waiting for. We're even seeing some Christians turn to TikTok to preach about being pro-choice. On the Eternal Word television network, the slogan is Live Truth, Live Catholic. The Catholic News Channel even has a weekly show focused on the pro-life movement. One of the anchors with EWTN is Montse Alvarado. She's the host of EWTN's News in Depth, and she joins us now. Thanks for coming on the program.
Thanks so much for having me. It's great to be here.
I'd just love to know, I think that sometimes there's not enough awareness or attention on religious media in the U.S. I'd love to know how your network is covering this big bombshell news this week.
You know, Brian, I love the discussion you were just having because you're right. A lot of people don't want to talk about this issue. They don't want to talk about abortion. They're uncomfortable. But this is a discussion that religious news outlets, EWTN in particular, has not been shy about talking about. And they didn't wait for the egregious Supreme Court leak to start this discussion. They've had it since this case was taken on. EWTN had a series called Life After Roe, Debate in the States, talking about what happens in every single one of these states when Roe is overturned and defining what Roe is, explaining to people, just like David French said, they don't know what happens when Roe is overturned. They don't understand what happens in their local community. And so we want to look at those real stories and let people make up their own minds. Finding the truth, like you said, that is our mission with the Catholic Lens.
I noticed that you have been doing that series for weeks already, preparing viewers for this likelihood. Do you view what you do as a pro-life, as anti-abortion, period? Do you advocate for a national ban through the Senate and the House in the years to come?
The life issue is so complicated, but the Catholic Church makes no mistakes about this. Pro-life is pro-life. Life is life. It begins in the womb. Everybody knows that. Making the decision about abortion is one that has been tainted by misinformation from the right and from the left. And that's the goal of EWTN, is bringing out that truth. Mother Angelica founded this network, a woman founded this network, to be able to share the truth with people. And that's what's missing in the media today. And that's why EWTN is so important.
What's the misinformation from the right?
The misinformation from the right, I think that even saying that the leak is a full ban on abortion, telling people that Roe versus Wade is when this is over, that's a big, big, big mistake that the media is making. Telling people that that's where the fight ends. It doesn't end there. That's the beginning of a discussion that has been stilted. The democratic process stopped on this issue the moment that Roe was decided by 7 men.
And you're saying, when we talk about pro-life, it also means taking care of the families, helping people, supporting them. But do you actually trust Republicans to follow through on that?
Republicans, Democrats, you have Democrats who are pro-life as well, who want to see families taken care of. Kristen Day is always on TV shows telling people, listen to Democrats who want to be a part of this party and feel completely excluded.
Do you, as we talk about this in the past few days, and many people are getting up to speed for the first time, can you see why many women, and some men for that matter, are afraid that IUDs and IVF will be threatened in the years to come?
There is fear, I think, on both sides. If you look at Catholic churches this morning, they had people standing outside their doors, fearing that someone would come in and have a sit-in or even provoke violence in their masses, their Mother's Day masses today, because people are fearful. Like I mentioned, on both sides, again, from lack of information. They don't understand what's happening here. They're scared. Emotions are raging. And it's the role of the media.
It's not just lack of information, right, Montse? It's also Republican lawmakers passing legislation that would cause IUDs or even IVF to be at risk.
Do you really think that? Do you really think that this is only the Republican Party? You don't think that there's fear-mongering on both sides? The nice thing about being at a Catholic network is I don't have to look at things through a political lens. I don't have a political agenda. EWTN is focused on Catholicity, the Catholic faith. And so we don't need to pander to one side or the other. We just need to focus on the truth.
Including the many Catholics who do seek out abortion? Or believe it's
many Catholics who have suffered abortion, many Catholics who don't understand the beginning and the end of life, who need a network like EWTN to share that information with them.
As I said, it is very complicated, and you're showing us that. Thank you, Montse. Thanks for coming on.
Very complicated. Thank you so much for having me.
Now to another personal story with a unique twist. For several years, Kate Smith was a reporter for CBS News, and part of her beat, for a while, all of her beat was reproductive rights. She filed news of day reports and long-form documentaries. One even took her to El Salvador, where abortion is illegal. Last summer, she decided to leave CBS, and she's now working for Planned Parenthood as the Senior Director of News Content. And Kate Smith joins me now. Kate, why did you leave CBS News last year?
There's a few different reasons why I left CBS News, but I think most relevant to this conversation is that at the time, my editor was no longer interested in covering abortion policy and sexual reproductive health as a dedicated beat, which is something that I had spent so much time learning and becoming an expert in. And so when I was thinking the next steps of my career, having that off the table, I was more willing to consider other options.
I think we need more reporters on that beat, not fewer, but okay. So tell us, what does the Senior Director of News Content at Planned Parenthood do? What's your job?
So abortion policy, sexual reproductive health, it's often covered, it's a local news story, but it's often covered with a national news frame. So when you read a story, say, about Texas's 6-week abortion ban, you're going to get a quote in there from Ted Cruz. You're going to get the size and scope of how many abortion bans have been passed, that kind of thing. But for the patient who wakes up that morning and wants to know whether or not they still have an appointment, that's the kind of news that they need delivered. And I tell you, in that article, I promise you, she's not going to be able to figure out whether or not her appointment is on. And I tell you that because I was a reporter who was writing those stories for CBS, and I can't tell you how many DMs I got, how many emails I got, how many phone calls I got from these patients who were asking me, hey, I saw your article about this 6-week ban. Like, can you walk me through whether or not I have an appointment today? And then I can tell you today, after that leak on Monday, our Planned Parenthood health centers, we have been flooded with calls from people who are concerned about their birth control appointments or concerned about their abortion appointments. There's a lot of, because of the way that we cover abortion in the media with this national frame, often it's a political story. We're leaving patients out of the equation. So at Planned Parenthood, as doing news content, what we want to do is we want to solve for that. If you want to understand what your rights are right now, come to Planned Parenthood. We're the experts. Like, think about cancer, for example. If you wanted to understand, cancer treatments, you'd rather go to Sloan Kettering's content than a New York Times article, right?
Ah, okay, that's interesting. That makes sense. Last year, though, National Review, the conservative outlet, called you, or 2 years ago, Planned Parenthood ambassador to CBS. They said you were posing as a reporter and constructing articles that more closely resemble press releases than news. So that was the charge when you were at CBS, and now you're at Planned Parenthood. How do you react to the conservatives who say you were biased in your CBS coverage?
Look, if you're a blogger online, you might not realize all of the different layers that someone goes through before they publish a piece, before they go on air. We have standards, we have lawyers. Before anything goes on air, there's been a thorough review of what's been going on. So I stand by every article I write. And I would say that making that accusation, you're playing into the right. Anyone who doesn't fall by their rules, who is an anti-abortion, is against them. So if you're trying to cover this from a neutral point of view and you're including both sides, they automatically think you are against them because they view doctors as for abortion, and they view them as biased, even though these are doctors we're talking about. So I really reject all of that criticism. Again, I think these people just don't understand how newsrooms actually work. They don't have that kind of experience. But yeah, completely reject that criticism.
While at CBS, I mentioned your trip to El Salvador. What did you learn there, and how does it relate to the U.S. now?
Yeah, that reporting trip to El Salvador was really eye-opening, and it really helped me put together the pieces of what I was seeing on the ground happening. And at the time, the reporting trip was in 2019, so none of these 6-week abortion bans, the really extreme ones that you see, had gone into place yet. And we were only hearing from doctors and politicians about what might happen if an abortion ban were to go into effect. When we went to El Salvador, what we saw is all of those things that these doctors and politicians had warned us about were happening in real time on the ground. I spoke to a doctor who, in no uncertain terms, told me that he has had patients die because he wasn't allowed to give them an abortion that would have saved their lives. We met with a doctor who was giving abortions illegally, and he was saying there's been absolutely no difference in demand for abortions, whether it's legal or not. There's no difference. And then most, really keeps me up at night is when I spoke to the women who were in prison for having an abortion. And there were some in there who had not seen their family in years because this prison is in such a dangerous place that their family can't visit. And they say they had a miscarriage and they woke up, they had an obstetric emergency, and they wake up and they are shackled to the hospital bed, and there is a police officer in there investigating them. And I can tell you, the doctors told me, when they are looking at a patient, there is no way for them to tell the difference between an induced abortion and a spontaneous miscarriage. You can't tell the difference. That is a medical fact. And so, it's just up to a judge to decide. And these people were saying they were innocent. And as a proof point, many of those women who were in prison, they have since been released because there wasn't enough evidence to put them in prison. So again, all of these things that we, say might happen if abortion gets banned, if abortion becomes illegal, they do happen. This isn't a theory. We don't need to speculate. We have actual facts that can inform what happens.
Kate, thank you very much. Thanks for being here. Leaks. They're definitely a theme this week, from the Supreme Court now to the battleground in Ukraine. Why are anonymous U.S. officials bragging about sharing intel with Ukraine that caused Russian deaths. We're going to get into that with David French in just a moment. And this just into CNN, Canadian Prime Minister Justin Trudeau has become the latest head of state to visit Ukraine. His office now confirming that he's there to meet with Ukraine's president. Further details to come. The U.S. First Lady Jill Biden also traveled to the country earlier today and met with the Ukrainian First Lady. We'll have more on this later in the day here on CNN. We have to talk about the leaks this week, including reporting from the New York Times claiming that U.S. intelligence has been helping Ukraine kill Russian generals. The White House pushed back on that framing, calling the headline misleading, saying the story was irresponsible. There's also been leaks from the intel community, it seems, about the U.S. providing intelligence that helped Ukraine target Russia's prized warship, the Moskva. NBC reported the president called his top U.S. intel and defense officials and urged them to plug the leaks. New York Times columnist Tom Friedman reporting, quote, "I'm told that he called the director of national intelligence, director of the CIA, and the secretary of defense to make clear in the strongest language that this kind of loose talk is reckless and has got to stop immediately." I'm told the same by a White House source, that the president was livid about these leaks. Joining me now, senior editor for The Dispatch, contributing writer for The Atlantic, David French. David, are news outlets right or wrong to publish the information they are told by these anonymous U.S. officials?
Yeah, I think this fits within a news outlet's fundamental news gathering function. You know, look, there are circumstances in which I think an administration can go to a news outlet and say, this is an absolute matter of life and death, establish it's a matter of life and death or the near equivalent, and a news outlet can responsibly say no. But what we're talking about here is the conduct of a nation and the conduct of our intelligence agencies. And one of the most important stories, the most important, arguably, story in the world right now. And I think what's important here is that I'm seriously doubtful that this is news to the Russians. If you're talking about the ability of Ukrainians to uncannily target key targets, Russian military targets, that is something that logic suggests is sort of outside of the capability of the Ukrainian military acting alone. I do think the main problem as a practical matter with the leak is the sense that the administration or administration officials are bragging about it, that that's something that they're trying to sort of throw into Russia's face, what they are doing, or take political credit or credit in the court of public opinion for their actions in the war. And I think that's where it gets a bit more dangerous, because what's happening is they're essentially dunking on the Russians in public, so to speak. But as far as would Russia have any idea that we were doing this before the leak? I think that's just fiction.
I see. So these are anonymous leaks. We're also getting on-the-record confirmation about some chaos from the Trump years, thanks to Mark Esper's upcoming book. Let's take a look at this. His book comes out on Tuesday. He was, of course, the former Secretary of Defense. And in the book, there's a lot in the book. One of the revelations is that Esper claims then President Trump asked him in 2020 about launching missiles into Mexico to destroy the drug labs and kill cartels. Maybe Trump thought he could do it and Mexico wouldn't know, and Esper had to talk him down. But you know, here we are, David, yet another incredible revelation from the Trump years, this time on the record from the former Secretary of Defense. And he had to sue to get his book to be published, because there's this Pentagon pre-publication process where his book was held up. And according to CNN's Oliver Darcy, this is what held it up. They didn't want this drug lab detail to come out. So he sued. Now the book is coming out. Tell us about that process, though, that the Defense Department had to review his book first. Is it possible they were trying to stop embarrassing news about Trump from getting out?
Well, that's not the intent of the review process, although sometimes that's the effect of the review process, or the way that the review process is distorted. The intent is pretty obvious and makes sense, in that if you're a person who is exposed to an avalanche of secret information, there need to be steps taken in classified information. There need to be steps taken to make sure that classified information doesn't enter the public domain. But it is not a process that is supposed to be protective of the president's political reputation or save a president from embarrassment. Embarrassing moments aren't classified because they're embarrassing. And so I think that oftentimes when you do have a pre-publication review process, one that's sensibly designed to prevent a leaking of classified information that could damage national security, it can often morph into something else, a process designed to prevent embarrassment.
I see. Well, the book is out Tuesday. We're going to see it for ourselves. David French, thanks so much.
Thank you.
Up next, what CNN's brand new CEO wants this network to do. Big change at the White House. A new face behind the podium in the press briefing room. Jen Psaki announcing her departure as expected and naming her successor, Karine Jean-Pierre. Currently the White House's principal deputy press secretary. She will step into the official press secretary role when Psaki departs in this coming week. Jean-Pierre, seen on Friday at this year's GLAAD Awards, she'll become the first Black and out LGBTQ person to hold the position of White House press secretary. She's no stranger to the media, of course. She's already filled in for Psaki several times, so she's a logical choice. What will this mean for the White House? Let's bring our media panel in for a conversation about that and more. Elahi Azadi of The Washington Post is with me, Brian Lowry of CNN, and NPR TV critic Eric Deggans. Elahi, this is a logical move for the White House, but it is notable given her background, her trailblazing status. This comes when there are debates about gay rights, when there are anti-LGBTQ laws being passed in many states, and Jean-Pierre now taking over later this month.
Yeah, this is definitely a history-making moment, but as the new press secretary has said, when she came out to talk about her appointment in this role, that she acknowledges the history being made, but she tried to pivot and say, you know, everyone who's here at the White House, we're here on behalf of the American people. And, you know, the Biden administration has made these sort of history-making moves before. It will be interesting to see this new press secretary in this role at a time when issues around LGBTQ rights are coming to the forefront in media coverage, but especially on the state's level. And also, you know, we were expecting Jen Psaki to leave the Post for some time. She's rumored to be going to MSNBC. We'll see if that's the case. But yeah, it does make sense as far as who would take the mantle. And you know, Jen Psaki, when she came into the role, she made her whole point to sort of restore the protocol or the quote unquote civility that had been absent from the briefing room during the Trump administration. And, you know, her briefings don't make cable news the way that they did during the Trump administration. So I would expect nothing to change in that regard.
Staying on the cable news point, Karine's partner is Suzanne Malveaux, a CNN correspondent here. So I asked CNN about that possible conflict of interest, and here's the statement. Suzanne will continue in her role as CNN national correspondent, covering national, international news and cultural events, but will not cover politics. That's the statement. Not cover politics, Capitol Hill, or the White House while Karine is serving as press secretary. So that's CNN. Let's go to the MSNBC angle. Psaki is going to be joining MSNBC this fall. She hasn't signed the deal yet since she's still at the White House, but she is going to MSNBC. Is there a possibility, Brian Lowry, that she plays a role at 9 p.m.? Rachel Maddow, as of this week, is only hosting on Mondays, so MSNBC has a big 9 p.m. vacancy.
Well, that's a possibility. I mean, that would be a really big promotion. That would be a big jump. You know, we've seen, I always liken in a way to cable news, people from going from government and politics into cable news to be coaches going from the sidelines straight to the broadcast booth. And some of them can make that transition easily and some of them do not. And it would be a huge gamble, I think, to take someone who really hasn't had the experience. There is a unique skill to hosting one of these shows. And I think taking someone straight from that and putting them in that, you know, Nicole Wallace has blossomed into a very accomplished anchor, but I think that's a learning curve.
I agree with you. I'm glad you think this job looks hard. I'm glad you think so, Brian Lowry. CNN, 9 p.m. vacancy as well. The new CNN CEO, Chris Licht, who started work on Monday, he said he plans to have a new 9 p.m. show installed in the fall. I want to read part of Licht's memo to CNN staffers. I think it's interesting about where this network is heading. He said, quote, sadly, too many people have lost trust in the news media. I think we can be a beacon in regaining that trust by exemplifying the best characteristics in journalism, fearlessly speaking truth to power, challenging the status quo, questioning groupthink, and educating viewers and readers with straightforward facts and insightful commentary while always being respectful of differing viewpoints. First and foremost, he wrote, we should and we will be advocates for truth. Eric Deggans, you're a non-CNN voice here. Anything stand out to you about that?
Well, you know, we have heard that Chris and the new bosses at Warner Brothers Discovery are interested in a CNN that's more focused on news coverage and less focused on opinion. And so this seems sort of in line with that. I've known Chris since he was executive producer of CBS This Morning, and he's also someone who's known for hiring talented people and letting them do their jobs, which is a little different way of going about things than the previous guy in the top job, Jeff Zucker. So it will be interesting to see how far he lets the people underneath him take some of these coverage ideas and coverage decisions. You were talking about the 9 p.m. slot, and Chris has said that he wants to do some experimentation over the summer before landing on a permanent choice this fall. What's interesting to me is that, you know, at MSNBC in particular, I haven't seen a lot of consternation over developing someone to take that job. And so I wonder if the cable news channels aren't shifting a little more and more focused on online. We've seen Meet the Press, for example, is going to have a show that's on NBC News Now. They're ad-supported, news network, digital network. So, I'm wondering if there's a less of an emphasis on linear television in general here.
Still popular and still profitable, though. And my favorite part of Lick's memo is about challenging groupthink, questioning groupthink. That will be a benefit for viewers. All right, stand by, everybody. More in a moment, including the Johnny Depp Amber Heard trial and why it's causing such a media frenzy. Johnny Depp versus Amber Heard seems to be everywhere. The trial in Virginia is spawning hashtags, TikToks, memes, and lots of live coverage, wall to wall on multiple channels and streaming services. Of course, this is a high wattage trial between formerly married actors, big celebrities. It's understandable there's a lot of media interest, but there's a public spectacle aspect to it that seems uncomfortable to a lot of people. So I want to ask my guests about that. The panel is back here with me, Brian Lowry, as well, Eric Deggans, and Elahe Izadi. My chair is breaking as I'm talking to y'all, so that's why I'm stumbling. So Brian Lowry, while I fix my chair, let me ask you, what's the unique quality about this trial? What do you see going on in the coverage?
Well, what I really see is that this is one of those situations where the audience is leading the media as opposed to the other way around. If you look at this story and you're privy to that kind of information, this is near the top of search. Amber Heard, Johnny Depp, every single day, often above other, major stories. So, because this is a relatively modern occurrence, that we get real-time data on what people are searching for, what people are looking for, and that includes newspapers as well as TV networks and digital operations. They're feeding that appetite. So this is really a case where I think news organizations, we often think of them being monolithic and making decisions. In this case, they're giving the people what they seem to want.
The audience driving the media. Elahe, do you feel that you haven't been covering this trial specifically, but do you feel that on the media beat and previously the Styles beat?
Yeah, so we've been covering the trial every single day in part in Washington Post. It's taking place in Fairfax, Virginia, not far away. And what our coverage is showing too is that this whole spectacle is taking place at the courthouse. I mean, in some ways, this is a local story for us. You have throngs of Johnny Depp fans coming out, trying to pack the court there. They have to line up early to get wristbands to get in. So, whereas maybe something like this you would think take place in California, maybe there would be a camera allowed. In this case, the judge had discretion and chose to allow cameras. And now we're having in our own backyard of the Washington Post, this sort of spectacle unfold. So I know we've been covering it in that way as well.
Yeah, it's a local story. Eric, how do you think people should process these cameras and courtroom events when these trials become like entertainment vehicles?
Yeah, it is a sort of odd to see this story explode, particularly across social media. And what has often happened is that because the trial itself is long and can be tedious, what people are doing is grabbing little bits and pieces and then adding their own spin to it and posting it on social media. We're seeing it on TikTok. We're seeing it on YouTube. We're seeing it on Instagram. And so people who are not actually watching the trial may have a really distorted idea of what's actually happening, depending on which source that they get their information from or which clip they watch. And so it's been interesting to watch the different testimonies sort of sliced and diced. And I think Johnny Depp, by testifying first, got a real head start on public opinion. And so I think Amber Heard is having a hard time now because he's had the ability to sort of set the agenda as far as what the arguments are.
Thank you, everybody, for the conversation. Quick correction, by the way. Earlier, I called Justin Trudeau the head of state, but of course, he's the head of government. Queen Elizabeth is the head of state in Canada. Thank you to the viewers who wrote in to tell me. Happy Mother's Day to my mom, my mother-in-law, my wife, Jamie, and to all you moms watching right now. State of the Union with Jake Tapper is up next.
I'm Lewis Hamilton.
And I'm Tom Brady. You're watching World Sport on CNN.
It surely can't get much better than this. Two of the greatest legends in any sport are with us today as we take you live to the inaugural Miami Grand Prix, where Charles Leclerc is hoping to consolidate his lead in the drivers' standings. And get this, she was just so excited that she completely forgot to pick up her medal. Fortunately, Sam Kerr hasn't forgotten how to score goals. Her latest strike was out of this world. Hello there and welcome to World Sport. We're coming to you live from CNN Center. I'm Don Riddell. Formula One is a global sport, but it can sense really big opportunities for US expansion, and that's why this weekend's inaugural Miami Grand Prix is so important. F1 is breaking new ground, and F1 could be crowning a new champion later this season. After 4 races, Ferrari's Charles Leclerc is leading the standings by 27 points. On Saturday, he qualified on pole position, and he is thoroughly enjoying his weekend so far.
And to see so many people in the grandstand, it definitely motivates us. And there are also a lot of Ferrari fans, so it's amazing. So yeah, the last weekend hasn't been great for me. I did a mistake in the race, but today went well. So we're starting on pole, and we need to finish the job tomorrow.
You know, around 300,000 fans are expected to attend throughout this race weekend, and our Amanda Davis is one of them. Great to see you, Amanda, and it sounds like this is F1 at its finest. Amazing sport and really fun people watching too, right?
Yeah, absolutely, Don. And I feel I kind of need to start with an apology to the viewers for maybe not giving them the full picture with a list of superstars I mentioned yesterday. Like, not even the half of it. There are so many A-listers in town here in Miami this weekend. I'm not sure there's anybody left in Hollywood. The entertainment magazines would have an absolute field day. I know Michelle Obama was pictured in the Mercedes garage watching on with the action, but on this huge weekend of the NBA playoffs, we've got LeBron James and Michael Jordan in town, as well as the likes of George Lucas, Billie Jean King, Eileen Gu, Renee Zellweger, David Beckham. I mean, the list goes on and on and on. This is the hottest ticket in town. And you know, this is the race that Liberty Media really wanted to add onto the calendar when they came into the sport in 2017. They haven't quite got the beachside location that they were hoping because of opposition from the locals, but they have built a fake marina complete with super yachts, so fans can still watch the action as if they were in Monaco. But it's really the perfect storm of timing, this, not only the race here in Miami, but also with the added spike of interest from the Netflix series Drive to Survive, really opening up this sport to an entirely different audience. And one of the people who has become really F1's biggest super fan is a face and name many World Sport viewers will be familiar with, the NFL star J.J. Watt. He has not only become an F1 fan, he has become a massive fan of the US team on the grid, Team Haas. Not necessarily the sexiest team on the grid, but they do have Gunther Steiner as their team principal. And Watt has been here this weekend, soaking in the atmosphere. I've got a chance to catch up with him and Gunther ahead of the action.
I think it's the passion, it's the excitement, it's the teamwork and the energy that goes into it. I think specifically here, and I think specifically the reason people relate to Gunther is because of his energy and how much he pours into his team and his guys, how much he cares, and a little bit of the flair and a little bit of the character and the colorful language as well, but it's real, it's honest, it's true, and you can tell that it means something, and I think that's what's so cool about it. Obviously, he's a pretty massive celebrity around here, so we're excited to have a little bit of his time.
Gunther, would you ever have expected you were going to have an NFL superstar leading your fan club?
No, that's a very simple answer here. No, I mean, he's the superstar, not me, you know, so he's a superstar, you know, he's the real man, you know. Look just at the size of us, I'm a little mouse, you know, compared to him, you know.
So you've had an insight behind those hoardings that not many people get, that even Drive to Survive doesn't get.
Yes.
What have you enjoyed the most? What surprised you?
The amount of things that need to go correctly for this thing to be successful. I mean, every single little nut and bolt, and there's a guy with Windex wiping down the wing, and just the amount of things and the amount of people that it takes for this to be successful. And if one person screws up one time, the whole thing can fall apart. And I think it's incredible to watch it in motion.
Is there any part of you that thinks Gunter might make a decent NFL coach?
Absolutely. I think he could, except for the fact that he told me yesterday he knows nothing about any sport other than F1.
Yeah, exactly. No, I told him, I said, I watch NFL, but I don't know the rules.
This has been compared to NFL's Super Bowl. What do you think in terms of the passion and the interest around Formula One in this race now?
It is incredible to see the magnitude of the event. I mean, just the sheer amount of people in the city of Miami, the amount of people walking around, the hospitality tents, it is massive. And I would say it does give you a very similar feel to a Super Bowl weekend from the hospitality and people standpoint, for sure.
And we need to talk about your performance and the pit stop. Do you think you got a shot at a place at Team Haas?
If I worked on it. I watched the film last night. I don't think Gunther would have been pleased with my performance yesterday, but if I came back a couple times and had some more, I think I could have been a rock star.
Do we know what time you did?
I think it was under 2.
That was optimistic, but I think his biggest challenge was to beat his brother.
Yes.
You know, I watched them when they were doing it. They just wanted to beat each other. You know, I was better than you. You know, and he being the older one, obviously he wanted to be the man. You know, so I mean, it's not easy. Everybody thinks it's easy to do these pit stops, but they are quite challenging, and the guys enjoyed it. To have 2 stars like them, just having the try, it's great. It's a great morale boost for our guys. You know, to have 2 guys at this level from NFL coming just to do their job. It's fantastic.
A real pleasure to speak to JJ Watt and Gunther Steiner. It was a disappointing qualifying session for them yesterday. Their drivers, Sergio Perez, Red Bull driver, just walking past there. I don't know whether you got a chance to see him. But yeah, the Haas drivers starting 15th and 16th on the grid today. Although I have had a catch up with Kevin Magnussen this morning. He says he's confident he will still be able to get in the points. Just a little bit frustrated with himself. They didn't bring a pair of shorts to Miami, baking in the heat wearing jeans this morning. As you mentioned, Don, it is the Ferrari of Charles Leclerc who will be the one to beat. He qualified on pole for the 3rd time in 5 races this season. It was a lap that former F1 world champion Mario Andretti told me yesterday he saw as a world championship performance, particularly after the mistake he made in Imola 2 weeks ago. It was a mistake that Charles has said he is determined not to make again, and there's a real opportunity for him this weekend to open up a bit more space between him and the defending champion Max Verstappen. Verstappen and the Red Bulls have had what Max has described as a messy weekend. A few reliability concerns that we've seen rear their ugly head once again for them. A mistake from Max in that qualifying lap as well. But, I mean, honestly, the drivers are here. They've been arriving within the last couple of hours. The stars are absolutely out in force. Will.i.am has just entered the paddock to much of a media scrum. Everybody wanting selfies just to be here for a little taste of the action. The race getting underway in just over 3 hours' time.
Looking forward to that, and great to hear about the weekend there, Amanda. It looks like and sounds like a lot of fun. Thanks so much. All right, next on World Sport, a brilliant goal from a brilliant player, and it wasn't just any old goal. This one clinched yet another league title for the Chelsea women. Stay with us. Hello again. The Women's Super League in England went right down to the wire on Sunday, but there was a very familiar outcome. For the third consecutive year, Chelsea ended up as the champions. Going into the final game, the Blues were a point ahead of their biggest rivals, Arsenal, so they knew that a win against Manchester United would clinch it. But there was a hitch. At half-time, Chelsea were losing to Man U, so they turned to their Australian superstar, Sam Kerr, who levelled the scores at 2-2 right at the start of the second half. And then she put the icing on the cake with a just brilliant individual effort. This is one of the goals of the year, surely a contender for the Puskás Award. Kerr just missed out to Alexia Putellas for the FIFA Player of the Year award. Surely this will help her cause for next year. She's now scored 20 or more goals in the last 2 seasons, so that's a second Golden Boot award. And the fans just love everything about her, including her enthusiasm for the game. This was the trophy presentation afterwards, and she was having so much fun that she completely forgot to pick up her medal. Fortunately, she was reminded to go and get it. What a fun moment, and what a player. The Premier League title race might have taken a major twist this weekend. If Manchester City can beat Newcastle right now, then they will have a 3-point lead with just 3 games to go. That's because their title rivals Liverpool slipped up on Saturday. The Reds at home have done with all 3 points themselves because they're locked in a tough battle with Arsenal for a Champions League spot. Within the have a 4-point lead over Spurs in the race for the top 4. And get this, they will play each other in just a few days' time on Thursday. Man City are playing Newcastle as we speak, and it's going pretty well. City 2-0 up as we approach half-time there. Now, we wouldn't normally talk about the 4th division of English football on this show, but we just couldn't ignore what happened on the last day of the season. It was amazing. Bristol Rovers hadn't been in the automatic promotion places all season, and they went into the final game needing a 5-goal swing if they were going to overhaul the club ahead of them, Northampton Town. Well, Northampton won their last game 3-1, meaning Rovers had to beat their opponent Scunthorpe 7-0. And what do you know? They did exactly that. And when the 7th goal went in, there was absolute bedlam at the Memorial Stadium. They hadn't scored 7 goals in a single game since 1964. And that was good enough to gain promotion up into League One. This was the scene at the end of the game, an epic sea of unbridled joy. We can only imagine how exhilarating it must have been to witness all of that drama play out on Saturday afternoon. What a story. Well, this weekend we have witnessed one of the most extraordinary upsets in horse race history. Have a look at this. Rich Strike barely made it into the field for the Kentucky Derby, but ended up storming through to win the whole thing. We've sped this up to show you how it happened, and the trainer was so excited, it sounds like we sped him up too.
I don't know how I fell down the paddock when he hit the wire. I about passed out. I'm so happy.
We're back with news of a major upset in boxing as Canelo Alvarez was toppled by Russia's Dmitry Bivol in Las Vegas. It was a step up in weight class for Canelo, only the second defeat of his brilliant career and his first since 2013. All three judges scored in Bivol's favour, and it looks as though a rematch is on the cards. If so, Canelo's much-hyped trilogy fight with Gennady Golovkin would have to wait.
Me siento orgulloso porque soy una...
I am proud. I am proud because I'm a very competitive person who is getting out of their comfort zone. Going up to 175 pounds, to another weight category that isn't mine, to get the best out of my career. I feel proud of what I'm doing. I don't feel ashamed because I'm looking for those challenges that many people don't take on because they're afraid of losing. And I'm here to seek out those challenges because it's what I like to do.
No, I didn't expect that he was better. I expect like that. I believed in myself, you know, I believed I could win. I knew that he has a hard punches and he will beat on my body, on my arm, and he will beat left hooks. I expected that, and he did it.
In the NBA playoffs, it looks like the Grizzlies have star power and staying power. Superstar Ja Morant led them to one of the best records in the NBA this season, but they have run into a bit of a buzzsaw in the Golden State Warriors, and now they might be without Morant. He's fouled near half court here. The Warriors' Jordan Poole pulling Morant's knee while reaching out, and during his free throws, Morant goes down, then starts rubbing that knee. Morant left the game. He didn't return, and Memphis coach Taylor Jenkins called Poole out after the game. Warriors denying any kind of malice, though. Rough night for Memphis, and on top of that, Steph and the Warriors were otherworldly, shooting better than 63%, a game-high 30 from Curry. Warriors won it by 30, taking a 2-1 series lead. Bucks Celtics tied at a game apiece, but Milwaukee charging into the lead with a monstrous performance by Giannis Antetokounmpo. He was like a bull in a china shop, finishing with 42 points on the night. But check him out on this play. A delightful pass for another score and a memorable celebration under the net. Guy's got some moves, not at all bad for a 6'11", 242-pound man they call the Greek Freak. One of the courtside photographers captured the moment. Bucks are 2-1 up. Game 4 is back in Milwaukee tomorrow. At Churchill Downs this weekend, one of the biggest upsets in the history of the prestigious Kentucky Derby. The day before the race, Rich Strike wasn't even in the field, but a late scratch changed everything, and the rest, as they say, is history. Our Andy Scholes was there to see it.
Well, the 148th running of the Kentucky Derby is a perfect example of why this race is just so amazing. At 80-1 odds, Rich Strike pulling off one of the biggest upsets we've ever seen in horse racing. Only Donerail at 91-1 odds way back in 1913 was a bigger long shot than Rich Strike and went on to win. And what a race this was. Rich Strike, middle of the pack around the final turn, then surged past the front runners Epicenter and Zenden to win in the final stretch. And what a moment it is for the Rich Strike team. Trainer Eric Reed is from Kentucky, actually lost 23 horses in a 2016 stable fire, lost records, trophies, memorabilia, but now he's a Kentucky Derby champion in his very first try. He's been a trainer for 37 years, had never made a Kentucky Derby, but he said it was a dream come true to be even called up to the field. Now he is a champion of the Run for the Roses. Owner Rick Dawson, he said despite the long odds, they always believed they could win.
Never enter a race we didn't think we could win, ever. That's just what Eric and I have always talked about. We don't do it. If they're not ready to win, then we'll take them back and train them some more and figure out where to put them. It's like having a football team and winning a Super Bowl, I promise you. Probably bigger. You only got one player.
Well, can this incredible streak for Rich Strike continue? We find out in 2 weeks at the Preakness Stakes. At the Kentucky Derby, I'm Andy Scholes.
Yeah, thank you, Andy. It looks like you had a lot of fun, and modest of you not to mention that you had a punt on the winning horse. Here is the winning ticket, although it looks like Andy had a few other bets this weekend. Look at the pile of tickets, and I'm guessing those other ones didn't turn out quite so well. Actually, Andy told me that his only way to recoup all those losses throughout the weekend was to bet on the worst horse in the Derby and hope for the best. And it turned out to be just a brilliant plan. Next on World Sport, a very special conversation with legends of two sports. It's not often you can catch Lewis Hamilton or pin down Tom Brady, but we managed it. Don't go away. All right, as we mentioned earlier on the show today, Miami is the place to be this weekend as it hosts a Formula One Grand Prix for the first time. These things always attract a cast of A-list celebrities, and this is no exception. As the 7-time world champion, Lewis Hamilton met the 7-time Super Bowl champ, Tom Brady. And these two legends sat down for us at World Sport. How cool is that? Our own Coy Wire was in 7th heaven as he conducted the interview.
What keeps you going? What drives you? What is it?
I always feel like no one cares about what you did in the past. You know, you have to be motivated to be your best this year. Everyone is showing up to buy season tickets for this season, not for what happened last year or 2 seasons ago. And I feel like people want to come and see me do great. They want to see Lewis do great. You know, they follow their sports heroes and their favorite sports teams because they want to see you know, the thrill of victory. And I feel like when I make that commitment to play, it's a kind of all-encompassing commitment.
And I think ultimately, selfishly perhaps, that belief that you can always be that little bit better. You're searching for that best version of yourself. And even if you win, you're like, there's a little bit left there, and you want to tap into that. And it's a forever struggle to seek it, right?
When your back's against the wall, when adversity strikes, how do you overcome that? Where does your mind go? How do you rise to that moment?
It's a very tough competition, and when I'm losing, I focus on, you know, how do I just get back in the game? You know, I always feel like, you know, I think of a Super Bowl in 2016 against Atlanta. We were down 25 points. You can't score 25 points in one touchdown. You have to just chip away, and then you got to get yourself in striking distance, and that just comes with a lot of, you know, great plays and great confidence in what you're doing. So I've obviously done it long enough where there's no part of the game where I feel like we're ever really out of it.
And we have a responsibility to pick each other up, but it's through those difficult times that we grow stronger and we grow closer and we pull tighter and we dig deeper than we ever thought. That, you know, they say you got to dig deep, but you can always dig deeper. You can always go that bit further. And I love that common sharing, that common goal with your teammates, because you know, no matter how many days or how much work it takes to get there, when you finally do, it's the greatest feeling. So I think it's just that ultimate belief inside of that we have as athletes, that it can be done. That belief in your side that you are great and that you can do this.
It is always just so cool to speak to these legends, but to have them speak with each other and have us listen as well, you can learn so much. That is it for this edition of World Sport. Thanks for your company. Take care, and I'll see you again soon.
The concept of design is evolving across Africa. From community architecture in South Africa to mobile classroom furniture in Uganda.
To equip the learning environment is perhaps the first step to encouraging the interest to learn, encouraging curiosity.
These young creatives are thinking big.
We want to be the IKEA of Africa. For us, it's like, where's the next market? Where's the next country?
And designing solutions to shape the future of the continent.
It cannot be done by one person. I don't think we can create meaningful, greener architecture with the challenges of today. As individuals, we have to come together as collectives.
This is Inside Africa.
What excites me most about what I do is the human impact, the change on people's lives. When people who cannot afford architecture, communities that cannot afford architecture are able to suddenly access it, and they cannot believe that this is theirs, you know. I think more than that also, just in terms of the change in their lives, improving their lives, making their lives much more livable.
Kenyan-born Kevin Kimwele says he found his calling to practice architecture whilst on a road trip to South Africa.
The
then I saw the city, Lusaka, in a very different way. This shelter at night, this bus stop at night, it becomes a lodge. All people of all walks of life assemble there. People buy mattresses, people buy airtime. You know, it's a market, it's a lodging, it's people buy food. This is the story of Africa, basically, especially the rural communities or the communities living in the periphery of the cities where they don't have infrastructure or they have very little access to this infrastructure. And I thought that maybe relearning architecture and learning how development works and being able to understand it in a way that would then enable a greater social economic impact.
Kevin is developing his skill set and knowledge through studying for a PhD in alternative design whilst running projects from his studio in Cape Town.
I'm one architect, but I'm engaged with many other architects and students and engineers, and we're able to very quickly narrow a problem and try, break it down and solve it. And what that does, it enables us to really push the boundaries of innovation, especially where alternative building methods are concerned. Very innovative work that is really important because it's creating acceptance of alternative building methods using waste, which many times is people hesitant, you know, when they think about recycling and using waste in buildings and the red tape that you have to overcome. I think what makes this work different is that it's been able to push those boundaries and still produce great architecture.
Kevin's projects span a variety of different environments, from rural to peri-urban to developed.
The community project in Drakensberg is very interesting. It's a preschool which we have gradually improved into an eco center and a preschool, and it's in a very remote rural area of the Drakensberg.
His projects take on a more personal note too. Whilst living in the Eastern Cape, Kevin designed a waste bike for a 76-year-old man who traded waste for food through a local community project. Fittingly, the bike was also made from recycled waste.
We've used everything from wine bottles to collapsible shipping containers. In the case of Gogo Selina, the whole structure, the whole building is actually built out of waste from the motor car industry.
Kevin teamed up with car manufacturer Isuzu Motors to rebuild the dilapidated home of Gogo Selina, a grandmother living in a Port Elizabeth township.
The community identified Gogo Selina out of her desperation because the roof of the house that she was living in was collapsing. And this was a one-roomed house built, I think, in mid-40s. And we thought, right, we were called in basically to revamp, stop the roof from falling in. But when we got there and we saw Selina's granddaughter learning in this environment, and we thought, well, it's very hard to concentrate when your books are next to the cooking stove and the bed and everything is in one room, you know. So we expanded that project and we built them a 2-bedroom house. And as we came to closer to an end and they started seeing the beauty of the building, you know, they were quite surprised that it's actually very affordable. It's something they can do, you know, and we've gotten a lot of requests from some of the community members if we can build them, and they're willing to pay for this, which is really important because it talks about a market. There is a market for this kind of architecture.
A stone's throw from his office, Kevin doesn't have to look far for inspiration.
We are at the Smoker Museum right here at the waterfront in Cape Town, and this whole building has actually been recycled or reused, and it's very inspiring to see such recycling at such a grand scale, and it's very much applicable to what we do too, in the sense that we're reusing and we are saving the carbon footprint, the energy, the water that has gone into older utilities and giving them a new life.
Signs of a global green movement can be seen all around Cape Town, as captured by Brazilian street artist Tiago Mundano.
He's been doing great work in mobilizing communities, and the idea is with the whole global approach of connecting with people from different parts of the world. In this case, we're looking at the we movement, which is encouraging us to collectively think on recycling, on the green agenda. This is a collaboration between Europe, Brazil, South Africa, or Africa, India, where we are kind of bringing our minds together to see what we can do in the me-we approach.
Back in the studio, Kevin is working on a top-secret project, which is expected to be a groundbreaking new urban development at the V&A waterfront.
This will be, in a way, a climax of the research work that I've been doing with my partners, because we are going to use a mainstream green template to actually prove that the work we're doing is still green. It creates the impact that we hope it can from an environmental and a social aspect, you know. So I think the difference here is we're really looking at solutions from Africa that we can support, that we can expand, and that we can replicate and scale out.
My name is Jumoke Dada and I'm the founder of Taylor. Taylor is a Nigerian furniture and lifestyle brand.
Nigerian designer Jumoke Dada was inspired to start her own furniture business after attending a design event in 2016.
I think that hit moment came when I attended the conference some years back, and like there was this like Japanese designer, American designer come around into Lagos, and you know they were saying stuff like Africans are consumers, we don't produce anything from this part of the world. And for me, like I didn't hear that, I wasn't happy hearing that. And also I was a teenager and I was like, what's it about Africans being consumers? And for me, I realized that there's a way I can use my gifts, there's a way I can express myself.
Jumoke says she was able to secure funding for the business through a venture capital fund in 2019. This move allowed her to open up a Taylor warehouse and office space in Lagos.
The furniture business in itself is a profitable business, to be honest. So from day one, we've been having some profits. And for us, our model is a D2C model. So, and it's not like we keep a lot of inventory. So most of our pieces are made to order, so it allows us like plan around cost and all of those things, so it still makes tailor a profitable business.
According to Jumoke, the business currently employs 94 people and produced 8,000 pieces of furniture, including bed frames, chairs and desks in 2021.
It's really very important that most of the 99% of the local resources that we use in making some of these pieces are sourced locally.
The designer turns to one of her mentors for motivation. Bosun Tijani often advises Jumoke on some ways she can incorporate the use of technology into her business. And one of the ways she does this is through augmented reality.
On Taylor's platform, we have augmented reality. So augmented reality is like you can augment like a virtual product into your space real time to see if it fits or not.
Taylor does not have showrooms, so the AR feature of the website allows customers to view furniture in real time in their own space.
If you go to Taylor's website, click on a product. So on the product, you have your options to look at it in augmented reality. So if you click on the augmented reality bit, then you can like kind of embed it into your space to see how it goes.
The 27-year-old says her mother raised her to think independently, a skill that has proved useful in growing Taylor.
So for us at Taylor, it's like we want to be the IKEA of Africa, yeah? So for us, it's like, where's the next market? Where's the next country? Where are the next young millennials or people that we are serving? Like every day I wake up, that's the next thing I think about.
We're problem solvers by nature, and I feel that this has enhanced the human's presence in life over the generations. I think to do this, I recommend highly a design thinking process, design thinking, the mindset.
Architecture school graduate Arnold Mugaga founded the design-based social enterprise Zetu Africa in 2019.
Zetu is Swahili for ours, ours Africa. This is the entire spirit of Zetu, a sense of ownership first. And so we owned into the idea that, okay, over 95 million African school children have no place to sit or write during class. Why? Can we build something that is sustainably, that can sustainably serve them, that's eco-friendly and affordable and context-specific?
Arnold and his team came up with the idea of a seat pack, a lightweight school bag with a fold-out bamboo stool.
The idea is that the child gets to class, they take their school bag off, they take out the bamboo portion of their school bag, and they have a seat. They take their school bag, they open it out. Each school bag comes with a blackboard writing surface.
The award-winning design is made in their workshop, located in a suburb of the country's capital, Kampala.
We learn and fail in this space, and our production begins here. So the designing, the drafting, the cutting of the material, and then we ship it off into the making.
Zetu also makes ordinary backpacks, and sales help fund the production of seat packs.
I have spent time around people that have some experience building things from scratch. And so their experience starts to rub off of you. And you notice that, well, as opposed to sitting and waiting for resources, you become very resourceful. And you figure it out where you are, how you are at that time. And say, well, how do I move forward? Even if I don't have X yet or Y yet, how do I move forward? And I think this has helped me trust in myself and our process much, much more.
COVID-19 was a test for Arnold and Zetu, along with many other businesses, who had to rethink their supply chains.
And so we looked at home, said, well, how would we build a seat pack completely in Uganda? This is where the bamboo came in. And so we sampled with different farmers. We tested different designs, and we arrived at a very sweet spot. Before the pandemic, to make a seat pack, we required $25 per unit. This was a school bag writing surface and the aluminium chair. After the pandemic, we required $18 to make the seat pack. And it was fascinating to realize that the obstacle is actually the way.
The seat's bamboo legs are processed off-site.
So this fine bamboo comes from the north of Uganda, Moyo district. It's very tough, and it's harvested 3 to 5 years and treated there, and then we have it shipped here, and it goes through a process that's overseen by Sunday, and it arrives at that, a very well-treated, smooth surface bamboo piece.
Arnold says they've produced 1,200 seats so far, which are being tested in schools across the country, including the northern town of Yumbe.
What we are going to show you is the 12th time we are refining this concept.
And every time the team works with a new district, Arnold gets feedback from local government and school children.
I think it is a very good innovation in the sense that it helps to address the needs of our young people who go to school, and it is more relevant to their local context. And therefore I think that if it is adapted and impressed, one, it is going to motivate them to be in school and also attend regularly. And I believe since it is a pack that they move with, it is more sustainable, and issues of ownership can easily be addressed.
What I love most about what I do is the repetitive feedback and an improvement cycle. So we go through a very tight loop. We always build, and then we apply, and then, okay, tell us what you like. And just hearing that, and then thinking, well, what can we do about it? And then incorporating what your wishes are, or what the user's wishes are into the product, and then seeing the reaction into the improvement. This is the absolute thrill for me. For most of the team, I must say, who enjoy this process.
One adaptation to SeatPack's design is a pouch for sanitary products.
This is going to increase retention in schools because no girls will be absenting themselves from school because they are in their period. They will be able to carry their extra material so that they can use it during their period and also safely carry it back home.
The team is donating 100 seat packs to 2 local primary schools here, with Arnold saying his aim is to deliver 10,000 countrywide in 2022 and 10 million by 2030.
With Zetu, we hope to make a very clear statement that the classroom can be wherever the child is. Our intent to making 3 very clear statements. That where the child is, the classroom can be. That you do not need to cut down trees to furnish classrooms. That you don't need to import finished products as working solutions onto the continent of Africa for them to be successful. That you can build these 100% locally, and you can improve them gradually on the continent as you go. With Zetu, we really intend to say three things. Have a sense of ownership, take that ownership and creatively translate it into results, which we call innovation, creative translation of information into a tangible thing, innovate and share that completely with the world. I think my proudest accomplishment to date is for sure getting over the fear of trying. Just do it. You know, you just do it. Just do it, see what happens. Whatever your plans are, approach them in your true sense, without any fear.
Takoradi in southern Ghana is what locals call the oil city. For ex-banker Peter Kweku Anoe, it's a place of opportunity.
I was working in a bank and I came on a holiday to see my family in Takoradi, and I chanced on an old school mate who is into shoemaking, whose company was folding up. So what I did was I partnered with him so that we could together help bring him back to business.
6 years later, Peter and his friends' social enterprise, Colix Venture, has established a successful shoe brand called Koliko Wear.
Our favorite design that really hits the market is our Koliko Chelsea boots. And this one is made out of waste woolen fabric. The inside too is woolen. The base or the sole is made out of car tie. That makes it more durable for people to use.
In fact, all of Peter's shoes are made from recycled materials. Around 15 million used garments are exported to Ghana every week, and much ends up in landfill.
Most of us don't even think about textiles waste, the harmful they cause to human race and our environment in general. We are always unsure, so we are more particular about this rubber, this plastic waste. But textile waste too is very harmful, and they take no less than 200 years for them to decompose, which causes great harm to the environment. So Koliko Wear decided to use waste materials or recycled materials so that we can help the environment to be saved by also contributing to the recycling sector.
Peter sources recycled jute sacks and cloth from the local market and second-hand shops.
This is one of the shops I pick my raw materials from in the manufacturing of our shoes. These are imported to Africa, and they are all waste materials. And we use these materials in a way of protecting the environment and also giving financial assistance to the supplier.
Peter says it takes 3 hours to make a shoe from start to finish.
Depending on the design you want to do, you mark it on the material or the fabric that you intend using in making the footwear. From there, you go to the gluing side. That's the next stage. You glue both the outer side and the inner side together. Then you take it to the sewing station.
His company currently employs 5 locals, including a couple of apprentices, to produce an average of 50 pairs of shoes every month.
So there's a saying that if you want a nation to be empowered economically, they are supposed to employ the youth, because the youth have the energy, the youth have the strength. So Koliko Wear thought it twice that why don't we engage the youth train them, give them skill, then also empower them economically. So that's the more reason why Koliko works with the youths. What I would tell all the young designers is we should be more innovative. And also, whatever we are doing, we should think about environmental protection. Because if we destroy the earth, our next generation wouldn't have anything called the earth. So whatever we are doing, we should think green, we should think about circular economy.
Sustainability is at the heart of Colix Ventures and a growing number of projects on the continent, as architects and designers turn to local materials to solve local problems.